Morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Q2 Market Performance and Planning meeting. My name is Hannah Pearson, representing the ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. Next slide. Some forum reminders for you. This quarterly forum that engages stakeholders in review of market performance issues and in high-level dialogue on release planning, implementation, and new market enhancements. This is intended to foster open dialogue and sharing of ideas and perspectives. The call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcripts should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, as I mentioned. Please keep comments professional and respectful, and then please try to be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said so that we can manage time more efficiently. Next slide. To ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right. You can then raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon located on the bottom right corner of the participant panel. Or if you're joined by audio only, please press *3 on your device. For everyone joining us today, please state your name and affiliation first before speaking, and you can also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists or myself. Next slide. The objective of this call is to enable dialogue on implementation planning and market performance issues, reviewing the key market performance topics, share updates to 2024-2025 release plans resulting from stakeholder input. And next slide. And here is a look at today's agenda. So we'll start with market performance updates from the Market Performance and Advanced Analytics team, as well as the short-term forecasting team. And then we'll potentially take a small break, and then we'll lead into the policy updates from Becky Robinson. And then we'll end with the 2025 Market Performance and Planning Forum schedule and next steps. So with that, I will hand it off.
Okay, next slide, please.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning, everybody. This is Guillermo from the Market Performance and Advanced Analytics team. Thank you for making yourself available for this conversation this morning regarding the first part of the meeting about market performance. We have a long list of items that we want to cover through this presentation. Some of those are updates to give you where we are with certain enhancements that we are exploring and pursuing. Other topics are more about the updates on the market performance, including some of the updates that we have for recent features that we have activated. We also have some market issues that we want to describe and provide the transparency, how we address those market issues. And the presentation for this first section, that is the market performance, is basically composed of two main tracks. The first 15 topics are going to be items that we are going to explicitly discuss this morning. We have planned to cover this in about 2 hours. The last topic, that is the general metrics, these are the standard metrics that we provide time after time for your own reference. If there are any specific questions, we may be able to answer those, but we don't expect to go specifically through these metrics today. And as we progress through the presentation, there will be different staff coming to discuss this topic, so you may hear different people coming in and out throughout the presentation. And many of the items that you are going to see here are standard updates that we provide from presentation to presentation. They are not going to be brand new. There may be 2-3 topics that are brand new, and they are timely discussed here because these are items that we are currently exploring, and we have the interest to convey and provide the transparency how they are being considered and what efforts we are taking to put this into the market. Thank you again for your time. We're going to start now with the first topic, that is the storage enhancement and the FRP performance. And this is the first topic regarding an enhancement that we have in the market, specifically the real-time market. You may recall that for the last 4 months or so, we have some conversation regarding a gap that we identified in the implementation of the FRP, where we were not accounting for the impact of the state of charge in the procurement of FRP awards. We have implemented that on June 3rd, and now we want to socialize some of the results that we have seen after this feature has been in place for basically 3 weeks. So with that, I will pass it first to Quinn Xiao to cover this first topic, and then we just continue topic after topic.
Thank you, Guillermo. Next slide, please. Okay, one more. Next slide. Yes. Hi, everyone. This is Quinn. I'm a lead analyst in market performance and advanced analytics. I'll start with the topic. Guillermo just gave a high-level overview. Through the previous studies, California ISO has identified an issue in the FRP design where the impact on state of charge was not considered when flexible ramping product was awarded to storage resources. And this becomes an issue or a problem in the market when uncertainties materializes in real time, but the battery resources carrying FRU awards do not have the state of charge to provide the extra capacity that was needed and reserved before that uncertainty happens. So to address this, then an enhancement was activated on June 3rd to better account for FRU impact on state of charge within the multi-interval optimization and to improve the efficiency of FRP feature this summer. Today we'll be sharing a very initial performance review. We'll be looking at some very early results giving the time we've had so far, the key metrics from specifically the 15 days before and after activation. Next slide, please. This change is documented, by the way, in Market Operations BPM, if you need a refresher or a reference. So here is a quick overview of the formulation. The change itself is the FRU variable in red that was added to this SOC-AT constraint. That is the second equation on the page. SOC-AT equation was introduced back in 2023 energy storage enhancement. The purpose was to manage the feasibility of regulation awards. So reg up and reg down was introduced, was included in state of charge AT back then, and to not introduce the direct coupling of energy and AS by keeping it as a separate equation. So the first one is state of charge energy only, and then the second one is state of charge AT, stands for attenuation factor. So with this enhancement, now the FRU term is added to this existing equation. Next slide, please. Before diving into the metrics, we can walk through a simple example to review how the calculations work, how the math works on a high level. Here we are looking, assume we have a 4-hour battery operating range going from -200 to +200, and assume 4 hours charging, so 4 hours discharging. So the state of charge min goes from 0 to max of 800 megawatt hour for this resource. And we're picking 1 hour by RTPD, 15-minute intervals, so 4 RTPD intervals showing up here, 500 500 to 545, that is the last RTPD interval of the hour. Assume that it has an initial state of charge of 50 megawatt hour before going into the hour. So the columns here start with the time interval I just mentioned. The energy megawatt, FRU megawatt, those will be a feasible solution on the resource level. Here, a feasible solution goes like this. This resource could get a 40 megawatt of energy for the first and second intervals, and then a 60 megawatt of FRU awards, excuse me, on the third and the fourth intervals. And with that dispatch, energy schedule and FRU schedule on top of the initial state of charge of 50, we'll be looking at a derived state of charge energy variable that is the fourth column, SOC megawatt hour, going from 50 down to 40 at the end of the first 15-minute interval. We got the 40 from 50 minus energy dispatch 40 divided by 4 for 15 minutes. So 50 down to 40 for the first interval, down to 30 for the second interval of energy dispatch, and then state of charge energy variable stays there for the rest of the hour. That's 30. And going to the state of charge attenuation factor, that is the parallel equation with the regulation and FRU. We initiate from the 50 megawatt hour initial state of charge. Again, the first two intervals, because there's an energy only dispatch, we have the same 40 and 30 megawatt hours for the first two intervals. And then because we have now FRU variables in the state of charge AT constraint, the SOC depletion potentially goes down to 15 at the end of the third interval and then goes down to 0 at the end of the hour. So in this case, a feasible solution looks like this, and the battery is hitting SOC AT. SOC AT is hitting the SOC main limit at the end of the hour for this case. To compare that with the before solution we had before this enhancement, we could have been awarding, say, 100 megawatt of FRU for the third and the fourth intervals for this resource, because the state of charge range is really wide. But then at this time, SOC AT is hitting limit. So that is the additional constraint or limit we have with this enhancement. So FRU award is down to 60 as a feasible solution. Next slide, please. Here is a little more complex example with regulation up and down embedded in there with attenuation factors and all. I'm not going to go through the details into the numbers here, but if you go down the calculation, follow the equations on the second page, we saw numbers were the same. Next page. Okay, so now we're ready to look at some metrics, statistics. We start by looking at the battery share in FRU procurement in RTPD. Here we're looking at the daily distribution of the battery share in FRU passing group. And y-axis is the percentage, x-axis is trade date. So we have one box plot per trade date, 15 days before activation, 15 days after activation. So on the third, the activation was around 2-something in the afternoon. So the first market that sees the change will be somewhere around hour 4-ish. From here, we don't really see a significant trend change. We did see a little bit lower ends after activation for the daily distributions. Mostly the 25th percentiles look a little lower for some of the days and making the box 25 to 75 percentile a little wider. It could be influenced by the typical day-to-day fluctuations too. So that is the overall observation on the daily distribution. Next one. Here is the daily average by resource combination in FRU procurement. Again, the RTPD passing group. So the dashed yellow line on the third is the activation before and after 15 days as well. From this resource combination, we still see majority of the FRU procurement comes from the battery. That is the light blue on the chart. We don't see significant shift of behavior post-activation at this point. Next slide, please. The same data organized in hourly average. Here we are seeing a before and after hourly average. The x-axis is 24 hours of the day, the y-axis is in megawatt. So FRU procurement by resource, different resource types. Again, battery is in light blue. This chart, on average, we don't see a noticeable change or shift of behavior as of yet. The before chart is 15-day average, and then after chart is 15-day average post-activation. On the day off, some of the hours goes into the chart on the left, the other hours goes into the chart on the right, and then there's, again, the daily variations on the procurement target. It's hard to tell if there's any change at all at this point. Next slide, please. Okay, here, shifting to a little different angle, here is the daily average by region. This region definition is for illustration purposes. This is not a market definition in the observation. This is for a better visual for the presentations. And we see that there is a slight decrease in dark blue, that is California. And then this gap is picked up by mostly Pacific Northwest and a little bit from Central Mountain and Southwest as well. So this is the change that we see on the aggregation level, and it's still subtle. Next slide, please. To understand that shift, here is a heat map. The y-axis is trade date, x-axis is hours of the day. So each of the cell combination tells us the average battery percentage share in that combination, trade date and hour, trade date and hour. The color code is the percentage share number itself. We go from 100% in blue down to 50% in white, down to 0% in red. So on this chart, if it's more white to more red, it's a smaller percentage share from the batteries in the procurement. And again, June 3rd is the middle trade date that is in dashed line. So after activation, we did see a more red and more white colors showing up in this heat map. That is an indication that we had less battery percentage share in these hours of the day, mostly early hours of the day through the morning peak, and then peak hours through the end of the day. So that's working as expected. When batteries are on low state of charge, we expect the battery share in FRU procurement will be reflecting the change we put in for this feature. Next slide, please. Okay, so from an hourly average by region perspective, again, before is the 15-day average, after is the post-activation 15-day average. On the hourly level, we again see a slightly decrease on the same hours in the averages, early hours of the day in California through the morning peak. That is a little shorter, dark blue in the bar stack, and then the end of peak hour, evening peak hour through the end of the day, that is also a slightly smaller dark blue in the stack bar. And this gap is picked up mostly by Pacific Northwest from the view. Next page, please. Okay, that was all about procurement. Here is a little bit change of view. Here is a daily distribution of resource level FRU prices. We wanted to see if there's pricing signals with this new feature, right? So as of now, we don't see a significant change of behavior post-activation. After June 3rd, majority of the values for FRU RTPD resource level prices remain 0. These are box plots for each day, and 75 percentiles were all zeros. That's why there is a short line at the $0 position, and then all the dots we see on the chart are outliers at this point. Next slide, please. Okay, organize that same data in a different view before and after. This is an hourly distribution of the FRU resource level prices. Again, all the box plots are zeros before and after activation. Next slide, please. Okay, so that concludes the FRU checking for this enhancement. From this slide and on, I have some sanity checks to see if there is any impact on the other product in the same in the similar room. And the first one is flex ramp down product. Here is battery share in FRD before and after activation. It looks like the daily distributions look normal before and after activation. Next page, please. Here is the same heat map for FRD. We don't see a significant trend change before and after activation. The color trends remain the same for all these days. Next slide, please. Sanity check on the prices. We have not seen negative prices showing up for FRD on the resource level. That is good. But all the prices remain low pre and post activation on FRD as well. Next slide, please. So that was FRD. Here is regulation. This is hourly average regulation awards before and after activation. Orange is reg up, purple is reg down. We don't see a significant trend change on the regulation awards to batteries with the activation. Next slide, please. Here is the battery percentage share regulation up requirement before and after comparison. The hourly trend stays normal. You may see that there is a bigger box plot showing up in RND 1 after activation, but it was because the requirements are generally low for this hour of the day. And from previously, the procurement, the regulation upward were somewhat in comparable ranges. So this was considered normal as well. Next slide, please. Sanity check on the regulation up prices. Here is resource level regulation up prices before and after activation as the daily distribution charts. All the prices remain non-negative and no significant trend change here. Next slide, please. And lastly, we look at the regulation down a little more. Here is the percentage share of batteries in regulation down requirement. The chain before after, the shape looks normal and stable. Next slide, please. And regulation down prices on the resource level remain non-negative. Everything looks okay. And next slide, please. Okay, so from here on, we have some more or less standard metrics for all the MPPFs. We start by looking at battery share in regulation market. This is Reg Up requirement over the 2-year period, and starting from January 2023 to what was available May 2025. And we're looking at batteries still saturate the regulation up market. The mediums are very close to 100% for battery share of regulation up requirement. Next slide, please. Here is the same trend in the down direction. Here's a percentage share of batteries in regulation down requirement. We see that, again, it's similar conclusion. Batteries are still saturating the regulation down market. Next slide, please. Here is a longer view of FRU procurement breaking down by resource types. The light blue is batteries. This is 1-year trend, so batteries are still the major technology out of everything else in the FRU procurement at this point. Next slide, please. This is an hourly view of the same data. So batteries are supporting all hours of the day for being flexible ramping up procurement. Next slide, please. Okay, that is the end of this section. Any questions or comments before we move on?
We do have a hand raised by Alba.
Sure.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Really good set of visuals to do future examinations of whether this is working as we go through the summer. I think, as you said, it's a very small data set so far, but 2 questions, or well, one is a request that when you do the box plots, you do them for the hours where the storage is being reduced only, just to see. I've got to go back on this. It's quite a few slides back, but you had a let's see, it might have been on 19.
A heat map.
Well, no, the heat map showed that you showed that there were certain hours where storage was reduced, right? And then in looking at the effect on prices, you were looking at all hours. You had a box plot of all hours, and I'd be interested to know whether, I mean, the basic thing we're assuming here is that this is going to cause some flexible ramping to be displaced, and potentially it's going to cause flexible ramping up prices to go up. And so we'd really only want to focus on those periods where that is actually happening, because if you're just looking at averages over all hours, it's not going to show anything significant. You know, you're going to get the kind of nothing much is changing result that you're getting. But really the interest is going to be in those periods where, because of the constraint, the storage constraint being binding, you're reducing procurement from storage, either displacing storage to other storage or to outside of the system, as you said, or to other resources like thermal resources. And you would expect some effect on price specific to that effect. And I think the box plots kind of sort of make it, you can't really see whether there is any effect because you're including all hours there.
Right, I believe we have one daily distribution box plot, and another one is an hourly view. And that's page 20, I believe. The hourly view still has, so on this one, we do have hours of the day, resource level prices, distributions, but post-activation, we don't see the price signal showing up yet. Partly right. Because, yeah, given this time of the year, we're not in tight system conditions, we're not tight in supply. Exactly. And yeah, energy prices are moderate too. So
Yeah,
we do.
and these are all useful visuals. So yeah.
Right. And when the tight system conditions shows up later in the summer, and when capacity becomes limited and higher prices shows up, we would expect some more FRP price signals as well, hopefully.
Otherwise, this is a kind of a meaningless change, right? So there should be some effect. Also, have you maybe this is another thing just to ask for in the future, is whether the change in the procurement in the tight periods, the operators have gained some confidence in the flexible ramping product because of the implementation of this constraint. Would be a useful thing to know. That's not obviously a numerical metric, but it would be good to know because that was one of the motivations for this change to be made.
Right. We are monitoring the load bias, the load conformance operators are putting in. That will be something we can look into further and communicate further.
Excellent. This is great. This is a great start. Thank you, Kun.
Thank you for the comments and suggestions. Any other questions for this section?
Looks like we do have a hand raised from Chen Yu.
Yes, good morning. Quinn, thank you for the analysis. Since the many, from different perspective, looks like, sorry for the background noise, that we don't see a big big significant change before and after the implementation of this SOC in the FRU dispatch. So I guess I have a question is, because we only implemented only for 3 weeks, and will you guys continue to monitor this and share that in the next MPPF on this subject? We really want to see how significant this has changed in the FRU dispatch and the price.
For sure. Well, this will be a longer-term monitoring for us, and we'll definitely give frequent updates in MPPF or some other forums on how the performance look.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I'm not seeing any other hand raised and no questions in the chat.
Perfect. I'll hand it over to Hai Feng then, I believe, the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hai Feng Lu. I'm manager of the market validation team here at the ISO. Can you hear me okay, Hannah?
We can hear you.
Great. Next, today I'm going to provide 2 updates for you. The first update is about pricing of congestion for multiple contingencies. The ISO announced a plan to improve how congestion pricing handles multiple contingencies in the last MPPF on March 20th. Basically, when a transmission constraint is relaxed under multiple contingencies, the enhancement will ensure that the most relaxed transmission constraint will be priced at the penalty price in the scheduling run of the market optimization. This change will address the compounded pricing effect caused by simultaneous relaxation of transmission constraint of a single transmission flow gauge across multiple contingencies. Currently, we are exploring this enhancement, and we are evaluating additional stressed scenarios to determine any further refinement. And after this assessment, our plan is to hold a stakeholder call to socialize our findings and the final proposal before we proceed with formal BPM change. That's the update for the first item. Any questions, comments for this topic?
I'm not seeing any hands raised and no questions in the chat. Oh, sorry. We do have a hand raised from Alva.
Just a quick question, and thanks for this update. Is there any possibility that this will be visible? It seems like this is purely operational, so this will not be visible in any way in the simultaneous feasibility test or in essentially sort of the forward pricing of CRRs. Is that correct?
This is more on the energy market, Alba. It's not going to be at all impacting the feasibility test for the CRRs.
Right.
This is specifically a pricing for the congestion in the energy market. In terms of visibility, I think before and after, there is visibility by looking into the shadow prices of the contingencies. There needs to be some work to do some association of identifying the same contingencies applicable to the same protected element, but information is available on OASIS and will be before and after available to participants.
You would look at actual prices, but there's not, these contingencies aren't going to show up in any way in the simultaneous feasibility test.
When you refer to simultaneous feasibility test, you mean the CRR model,
Right.
Mark?
Yeah, and the decision as to how much congestion CRR rights to allocate on different.
Right. So let me clarify. I could understand your question in different ways. One is that we are enhancing the pricing of congestion management for multiple contingencies protecting the same element in the energy market, but that doesn't mean we are changing in any way the process of what contingencies we deem credible to be enforced in the market. That is not changing. The set of contingencies enforced in the market continues to be the same. It's more about how we price those in the energy market. And because of that, I would expect that there wouldn't be any change in the subset of constraints that are modeled and enforced in the simultaneous feasibility test for congestion revenue rights market.
Thank you. You clarified that. Thank you. Sorry, it took me a moment to understand that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Do we see any other hand raised?
No other hands raised and no questions in the chat.
Okay, let's move on to the second update. Next slide, please. The second update is about enforcement of contingencies for FRP. Next slide. As you know, the ISO market solves security constraint unit commitment problem in the 15-minute market and a security constraint economic dispatch problem in the 5-minute market. Security constraints include flow gate constraints, and flow gate constraint can be either base case or contingency related. Currently, the ISO enforces only the base case flow gate constraints in FRP deployment scenarios across both the 15-minute market and 5-minute market. This improves FRP deliverability, but on the other hand, it's possible that the procured FRP capacity may not be deliverable when contingencies occur. So the ISO had a plan to start enforcing contingency-based flow gates in FRP deployment scenarios in the 15-minute only, not in the 5-minute market, effective June 27th. This change will improve FRP deliverability because we know the 15-minute market is the key market to commit any additional resources to ensure FRP sufficiency. Next slide, please. On the other hand, the outcome adjusted by the pricing for multiple contingencies we just discussed in the previous topic for energy may manifest for FRP scenarios. Therefore, we are postponing the activation of contingencies for FRP until the enhancement of pricing multiple contingencies can be implemented. That's the end of the second update. Any questions, comments, any feedback?
No hands raised and no questions in the chat.
Okay, with that, I'll
Oh,
hand over
sorry.
to you.
We did just get a hand raised from Chen Yu.
Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. So the implementation of the contingency-based flow gate in the FRP deployment scenario in the 15 minutes only, are you going to also apply those in the market sim when you're running the market for the day-ahead and EDEM testing?
I can take on that, and let me try to untangle a little bit the answer that I may give you, because I could see the association. Specifically for the current market that we have in production, this is an item specifically for flexible ramping product, which is inherently in real time. And the business process that we initiated a couple of months ago was specifically to activate contingency cases for FRP in the 15-minute market. And that is the postponing that we are doing until we address the pricing we discussed just in the previous topic. That is self-contained for the real-time market because it's specific for flexible ramping capacity. That is only a real-time market product. Now, I think you bring a good question, because naturally that could have some implications for what we are going to be doing for the day-ahead market enhancements when we implement imbalance reserves. Yes, you are right. That item is one of the 5 items we are going to be exploring and assessing what we should be enforcing. There is one specific item out of the 5 of the configurable parameters where we're going to be assessing the set of constraints we are going to be enforcing for deliverability of imbalance reserves, flow-based, thermal limits, contingencies, nomograms, and yes, the answer is we are going to be assessing what constraints we're going to be able to enforce for imbalance reserves, and that is specific for the day-ahead enhancements that is going to be initiating simulation as early as September.
Thank you, Guillermo. And since we're on this subject, I will ask a further question about this is the 5 parameters that you are, this is for the day-ahead market enhancement that you are going to share the result and share the configuration. I believe initially you guys set the day in August sometime that this meeting will kick off. And I haven't seen anything on the calendar. Will you shed some light, or is this something you would like me to take this offline?
That's fine. We're arranging the schedule, so that should be coming in the next few weeks. But yes, we committed, and we are ready to honor the commitment to start this in August.
Great. Okay. Good to hear. So we'll look forward for the schedules for those meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we can move to the next item, please. There is another enhancement that we want to socialize with the marketplace. We're in the exploratory phase for this enhancement. And it is regarding somehow about the mechanics of the market. Let me give you first some background. We have a market clearing process that uses all the inputs you can imagine: outages, bidding, resource characteristics, transmission conditions, and the bids from the resources. And then we plug all this into a mathematical model, and then we run this complex optimization engine. And out of that, we get the market solution that includes prices, schedules, constraints that are congested, and so on. When we are dealing with a very dynamic condition, because we update information as it comes around the clock, we experience from time to time some corner cases where some data is conflicting. Potentially, there may be an outage that is coming in the last minute, and that outage is just not feasible to implement given where the resource is located, right? I mean, typically, for instance, you may have an MSG resource that is operating in one configuration. There was an outage coming for the resource to be shut down, but there is no feasible trajectory to shut it down, and it creates a conflict. You may end up, in practical terms, in a variety of scenarios in which there is some conflicting data information that the optimization cannot figure out, because at the end, the optimization is just a numerical process that has to find a solution in what we call a feasible region. All the constraints we enforce in the market are defining what we call the feasible region. And the optimal solution, among many other feasible solutions, are contained in that region. When we end up with one constraint, and it just takes one to create a conflicting scenario such that the market doesn't have a feasible region, it just cannot find a solution. And when that happens is when we run a scenario that we call the market is infeasible. Infeasible in the sense that numerically the optimization cannot find a solution. This is what we have referred in our processes as a market disruption. The market is running and gives up because it cannot find a numerical solution. We have processes around this scenario because it does happen, and the process is precisely the market disruption. Can we move to the next slide, please? When a market disruption happens, and I really mean there is a market failure in the sense that you cannot get a solution, even if the issue was related to one single resource, one single constraint out of the entire market footprint, we don't get a solution for all resources. And that means we don't send a dispatch. There is no price, there is no dispatch, we just have a failure of the market. That is the reason we have this process of backfill, where we go back after the fact, we put in the last good available price, we ensure that the resources continue to be settled at the point where they were operating. There was no DOT specifically for those cases, and it creates a lot of challenges. First, it may happen at any time of the day. As a process, what we currently have is that when a market failure happens, we have to fix it because we need to ensure that the market continues to produce results as soon as possible. One of the approaches that we have is that we identify what resource, what constraint is causing the problem. The standard approach, manual action taken, is to effectively pull out of the market the resource with the conflicting constraint. We have to communicate by tariff provisions to the scheduling coordinator of that resource that that resource was causing a problem and has to be pulled out of the market until the issue is fixed. We report the market disruptions in the monthly market performance report, and there you can see the frequency. When that happens, effectively that resource is not longer participating in the market, doesn't receive a schedule or an award. The resource in real life may continue to operate and may continue to produce, is going to be settled based on what it's producing. And with that, we are able to avoid and mitigate the market disruption for future intervals, and now we can get a solution for the rest of the participants. Next slide, please. This is just to give you a snapshot of how typical it is to get a market disruption. And here you have the color-coded by market. The majority of the disruptions happen in the 5-minute market, and that is expected. That is where we have very tight schedules of 5 minutes to get a solution, including the processing, the review of the solution. And when you start getting too many of those, it becomes a problem for even managing the system, right? Imagine you have a set of disruptions that are happening during the ramping period of the day. Because there is a disruption, we cannot send dispatches, and the resources most likely are going to stay flat at the last operating target. If the disruption is happening for a few consecutive intervals, now it's a problem because the system is moving up and the resources are staying flat. So now the operators may require to start manually dispatching resources to keep up with the changes of the system. It's not optimal. And because of that, what we're exploring is an enhancement. Next slide, please, Hannah. That enhancement is, can we actually identify a priori the condition that may result in a market disruption? The issue is because there is no feasible set, there is a constraint that is problematic. Well, we know as part of the clearing process what constraints are violated, are infeasible, and therefore we could actually use that information to identify the constraint that is creating the problem, and we know by how much that constraint cannot be enforced. Effectively, we know by how much we have to relax it. If we use that information, and now in the subsequent run, in the pricing run, we relax the constraint up to the amount that now becomes feasible, effectively now we allow the market to have a feasible solution, is able to gain an optimal output, and we don't have a disruption. Now every single resource is going to continue to receive the dispatch, the schedules, there will be prices, and there could be that specific resource that caused the problem where we have to relax the constraint in conflict that may receive a schedule that may not be fully feasible because we are relaxing that constraint, right? We find that that still is a superior solution than the current practice of just failing the market for everybody, and even the resource that is in conflict when we pull it out of the market doesn't receive a dispatch. Here it's going to receive a dispatch that may be an approximation to what the optimal solution should be. We find that this is, along the way, a better, superior solution to come with an enhancement in the market. Next slide, please. The enhancement is the exploration of this formulation. To avoid the market disruptions, we commit that we continue to report the cases in which this enhancement has actually been used, that with the equivalent of the market disruptions to give you the transparency, how frequently it's happening. If you go back a couple of slides when I show up the number of disruptions, effectively it would be the same, but in this case, we were able to produce a solution. We would be reporting only those instances, why that happened, potentially what type of constraint was in conflict, and that will give you all the elements to assess how frequently this enhancement is working. We see this to be more of the mechanics of the market solution, being able to find a practical solution when there is conflicting information in the market. And we are expecting that we can proceed with a BPM change process. We are still exploring this enhancement. We want to put it in front of the market participants to hear any reactions. And when the time is ready, when that we feel confident that we have the functionality, proceed with the BPM, and at least you are going to have the background of where we are coming for this BPM process change. That is the update we wanted to give for this topic. And I see one hand. Alba?
Hi, this is Alva from PG&E. Sorry, I didn't identify myself before. Thank you for this, Guillermo. We'd seen this in the PRRs actually already. One question is will you have some sort of catalog of the kinds of constraints that could be involved here? And also, is it possible for the constraints not to be at the unit level, but I mean, it seems to me like you've pretty much set up all of the system constraints so they can be relaxed. But I just wanted to double check that are there cases where it wouldn't be a single unit, but the change would need to be for multiple units or the system as a whole?
Yes, good point, Alba. Yes, we are expecting that as part of the transparency, we're going to be disclosing what type of constraints has to be relaxed for the purpose of mitigating for the disruption. That will be contained in the metrics that we put in the monthly performance report. And that would include the catalog of the possible constraints that could be relaxed. I could tell you from practical experience, we are here talking in general terms about resource-specific constraints. Now, this is a level of detail that I didn't explain, but I can do it now. We do have what we call system constraints and also resource constraints. In general, all the system constraints, power balance, transmission constraints, and FRP requirements, AS requirements, all of those are modeled and priced correspondingly. We are allowed to relax those constraints at a penalty price. We have a slack variable associated with the bid cap, and we price those relaxations. This is what in the mathematical jargon we refer as soft constraints, because they can be relaxed, and there is a price associated with that. There is another set of constraints that typically are referred to resource constraints, like Pmin, Pmax, right? These are hard constraints, meaning we have to enforce those. They cannot be just relaxed at a certain price, because these are kind of more attribute-related constraints. These are the typical type of constraints that in some cases get in conflict when you get some data updates and causes the market failures.
Yeah.
The typical constraints, for instance, could be the timing, right? There may be, for instance, a manual dispatch imposed by the operator to move the resource from one point to another, but, well, maybe the timing needed for that is longer than what the exceptional dispatch is showing. So now the market has a conflict. So this would be a relaxation of that temporal constraint. These are the type of constraints we are talking about here, not the ones that are already priced and relaxed per the provisions that we have. These are more about the hard constraints in the system.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very good. And then the one other thing I think it would be worth taking a look at, and mostly this is real time from what you've said, but even in real time, there is a resource efficiency evaluation, which I assume would also have to be modified. And is there any consequence of that? I'm assuming in general not, but it is an issue we'd want to look at closely.
Right. No, we are not expecting to impact in any way the resource efficiency evaluation. This is specific for the real-time energy market.
Would the real-time resource efficiency evaluation, I have to think, by definition, you're saying it would not have to make these kinds of changes?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Guillermo. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alba. Next question, Robert.
Hey, Emerald. This is Robert Fisher from NV Energy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Robert.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I just want to kind of expand upon what Alba was asking. And I understand that you're talking about the resource-specific constraints that will be relaxed, but can you elaborate upon this? Are we going to see DOTs that would be outside the physical resource? Are we going to see ramps that are infeasible? I just want to weigh the difference between the current market function, which produces advisory results, versus what you're referring to as relaxation constraints.
Yes. Let me first subset to the pool of resources that this could be impacted, right? So when we take this approach, generally speaking, we are targeting only the resource that is with a conflict in the constraint, right? We are not talking about every resource in the system. When we have a current market disruption, every resource is impacted because we don't get a solution at all. When we approach this problem with this enhancement, we are going to be relaxing potentially a constraint for one resource, the resource that is creating the disruption. But that doesn't apply for the rest of the hundreds of resources that we have in the system. I really want to emphasize that this would be very targeted to the resource in conflict with the specific constraint. Now, depending on the nature of the constraint that is being relaxed, you may end up with a dispatch that could not be fully feasible for the next 5 minutes, typically if it is the 5-minute market, because we are relaxing a constraint, right? It could be a temporal constraint, it could be a ramp constraint, and that could be an implication. And that is the reason we wanted to bring this, because that means that there could be a dispatch, that could be an approximated dispatch to the resource in conflict that we believe is superior to basically not have a dispatch explicitly for the resource that now has to settle fully on uninstructed energy. In this case, the resource would get a dispatch. Granted, depending on the nature of the constraint, that dispatch potentially could not be 100% attainable. How material that could be? Well, in some cases, you may know we have failures that last one interval. There may be failures that last 2, 3, 5 intervals. That would be the extent of the complication.
Okay, so in the current status business today, we get an advisory solution which is based upon a feasible solution. And so those advisory solutions, as long as there's no large changes in load forecast or renewables types of things, could be very similar to the current dispatch, versus this new one has the possibility of having an infeasible dispatch on the resource that is affecting the failure, which potentially, depending upon the scale or size of that resource, could affect the overall ACE or bow measurements, because it is an infeasible solution, and for EIM entities, possibly creating a transfer solution that is infeasible as well. Do you see, or does that sound similar to what you're referring to?
Yes, and let me put the contrast, right? Because if you compare that against the current solution, when you refer to the impact of ACE, I would believe it wouldn't be much smaller than the current solution. If right now we have a disruption that is happening in the ramping period, well, all the resources are going to stay at the advisory, right? And they stay flat, even though you may be moving in the ramping period and your ACE may be not just impacted by one resource, but every single resource that is not moving. So the ACE impact is going to be much greater under the current conditions than under this approach.
But if it's an advisory solution, it will move. It will have the load forecast based upon how the advisory solution was created, right? So it would have that ramp period included in it.
Yes, as long as it is 1, 2 intervals, you are right. If it is more than few intervals, then you start getting into the problem of updating the information or stale information. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that, Guillermo.
Yeah, thank you. And if there are any comments, please, I would really like to hear back from the market. That is the reason we are socializing this and exploring whether it's a workable solution. So we really take into account your feedback to see how we can proceed with this. Okay, so with no further questions, we can move to the next topic. Okay, let me do this. Can we move to the next topic? There is one more slide, please. So we can come back to this one. Next slide, please. We're going to jump to market issues. Okay, Amber, can we check if we can hear you?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Guillermo. All right, I wanted to bring 2 market issues to the MPPF for awareness, as well as what the market correction was. I'm going to present the forecasting input side of things, and then I will pass it to Guillermo and team to present what the market changes were. Next slide. Issue 1 on March 25th, for those that are aware, within that time frame, use methodology called persistence. It's just in the RTD time frame. That persistence methodology has a 30 to 50% accuracy gain than using the external forecast service providers. And a lot of that comes from being able to use that real-time telemetry information into the formulation of the forecast and get it really quickly into the market optimization. We had some issues within the EMS system and the payload structure, or was it within the EMS payload, not the EMS system, I want to clarify that, on the morning of 3/25 from 7:55 to 8:30, which caused the market and the telemetry information in the market to form the persistent forecast to be stale. It was running off of 7:40 a.m. information. This, of course, was during the solar morning ramps. We have an example on the right-hand side, just looking at the CAISO BAA. I will note persistence is utilized for the CAISO BAA, both wind and solar. It's also used for the WEIM entities that have opted in, and they have a mix of wind and solar as well. The example is just on the CAISO BAA, but others were impacted too. We did see the largest errors during that solar resource fleet, which can be observed in the graphic overall. And then the telemetry returned, we got updated information in at that 8:30 timeframe. With that, we're working to implement protection that if we have stale payloads of the telemetry information that is identified. So if we don't see a payload received for 3 consecutive intervals, which is 15 minutes, we will be falling back to the external forecast service provider forecast to protect ourselves further if this occurs again. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about issue 2, and then I'm going to pass it to Scott to talk about issue 1 from the market perspective and issue 2 from the market perspective. Issue 2 was on April 1st. There was an input into the load forecast that was impacted. So the actual load data feed was impacted due to some Pi server issues that were happening, and that caused the forecast to trend off of incorrect actual load information. We, of course, have internal alerting. We have max actual validation rules. We have min actual validation rules. We have forecast movement validation rules, and as well as actual movement validation rules that are in the system. So we do know you're using telemetry information into the formulation of the forecast. There are protections there to help with that. Sometimes during those situations, depending on how the data comes in, that may be bad. It might be multiple intervals of increasing that you may not fall into those validation rule categories. This was one of those situations where not all of our current protections were in the ELFS system itself protected against the market seeing a forecast come through. There were a lot of situations during this event that there were protections that were there because the Pi data was impacted for the CAISO BAA, APS, as well as IPCO from hour ending 3 to hour ending 12, but the market impact was limited to hour ending 8. So for many of the instances, the stuff that was happening on the input to the forecasting system and the forecasting system's protections did protect the output to the market. But there was one interval that was not occurring, which was hour ending 8. With that, we have put internal to the CAISO more alerting on the Pi servers, and that was implemented very shortly after this on April 4th to prevent further issues and impacts of that information getting into the forecast system. With that, I'm going to pause and take any questions that you guys may have on the forecast input concerns and then the output concerns before I pass it over to Scott.
Thanks, Amber. I don't see any hands raised and no questions in the chat.
All right, well, thank you, Hannah. With that, I will pass it over to Scott to talk about the market side a little bit.
All right, great. Thanks, Amber. So I'm just going to talk about the market issues or the market impacts from these 2 forecasting issues. In the first case, we saw that stale telemetry that Amber talked about, and this ended up leading to a CAISO contingency run. We currently have an outstanding defect where we correct the prices for all CAISO contingency runs. And these corrected prices apply across all BAAs in the market, so not just for CAISO. This contingency correction was the only correction we performed for this particular issue. Next slide, please. Here is the market impact of issue 2. So in this case, we saw a pretty severe price spike in RTD. We saw the SMEC reach $1,000 for 3 RTD intervals in hour ending 8. Next slide, please. And in this chart, we see the actual impact of the forecasting issue on the RTD binding and advisory forecasts. So each line on that chart shows an individual RTD interval, with the first interval being the energy binding interval, and the rest of the line being the advisory forecasts used out in the advisory solutions. You can see pretty clearly there that 645 binding interval is a major outlier, and that low forecast caused us to set up incorrectly going into the rest of hour ending 7 and into hour ending 8. So that kind of incorrect setup combined with low battery state of charge and FMM to RTD VER differences caused the hour ending 8 price spikes. So we ended up correcting all 3 of those intervals with $1,000 SMEC in hour ending 8. And that's all I have for market impacts of these 2 issues. Any questions?
I don't see any hands raised.
All right, great.
No questions
Thanks.
in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Amber, Scott, for the update. Then, Hannah, can we go back to the topic that we skipped for the net transfer constraint, just to continue with the flow? Okay.
All right. Again, this is Haifeng Liu. I would like to provide you an update on net transfer constraint for CAISO area. Next slide, please. We have developed 3 new system constraints for managing net transfers. The first new system constraint is called CISO net import ITC. This new system constraint includes all dynamic import ETSRs for CAISO BA. The second system constraint is CISO net export ITC. It includes all dynamic export ETSRs for CAISO BA. And the last system constraint is called CISO net ITC. Basically, it represents the full set of CAISO BA dynamic import and export ETSRs. Under stressed grid conditions, using net transfer constraint can be a better alternative to limiting individual CAISO dynamic import-export ETSRs. It requires a lot of manual work, and this also provides CAISO BA operators the ability to proactively manage net dynamic import-export transfers. I would like to mention that this type of constraint is to all WEM BA operators. This enhancement basically is to provide the same tool for CAISO BA operators. So that's it for my last update. Any questions, comments?
No hands raised. And no questions. Oh, sorry. We do have a hand raised from Dan.
Yeah, hi, Dan Williams here from the Energy Authority. Just 2 quick questions. One is just how will the market be notified of when these constraints are put into place? And then two, this is only for dynamics, so it would not be impacting anything that's scheduled hourly or 15-minute block intertie transactions. Is that correct?
That's correct. For your second question, that's correct. This is only applicable to transfers, dynamic transfers between ISO and other EIM areas, so it will not impact hourly transactions. And for your first question, whenever those new ITC constraints, transfer constraints are binding, it will be, the congestion information will be posted, will be reflected on OASIS.
Yeah, and then also following what we have from the 2023 summer, when we started using the individual transfer limitations, we improved our communication process. And as part of the enforcement of this constraint, there is also companion information provided to participants that CAISO is enforcing the limitations. So it would fall into the same category of the individual transfer communication that we currently have.
Yeah, can you remind me how, since this is done proactively, just sort of how far in advance of an operating interval we'd ideally do this? And then when doing it, is there a certain time horizon that we would expect to see them put in for, or to stay in the market for?
Yeah, I don't want to say something I don't recall precisely, but I can send the information of the procedure that we have that we discussed in one of the previous MPPFs. I just don't have the information at my fingertips, but I will send you the reference of what we communicated previously.
Yeah, that would be great. And if it was back in 2023, I think you said that. Sure.
Well, we use the limitations in 2023, but then after the fact, we have discussions and we indicated that we improve our communication protocol. It has to be in one of those MPPFs following somewhere in 2024 when we discussed that after the fact. Okay.
Yeah, and it just kind of goes to maybe sort of the same direction as some of Robert Fisher's comments a little bit ago of just wanting to know kind of a little bit more proactively what sort of impact or ripple effects this may have for solutions for the EIM areas on the other side of the constraint that's being managed, and then sort of how long it would persist, and recognize that you're under stress grid conditions when this would be happening, so it's not always maybe easy to predict exactly what's going to be needed super far in advance, but just getting an idea of kind of how it'll operate in the market could be helpful for planning as we get into stress conditions later in the summer.
Yeah, understood.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, with this, we can move to the next topic, and we are moving away now from the market enhancements into more of the market performance. And let me start with one of the topics that we typically bring around this time of the year because of the seasonality nature of the topic. This is about the ongoing trends of renewable productions, and more recently, we included also the performance of the storage resources. Next slide, please. One of the topics that is pretty interesting to appreciate around the shoulder months is what historically has been referred as renewable curtailment. That is, the amount of energy that cannot be taken from renewable resources because of either oversupply or congestion conditions when they are operating below the natural production of energy. Historically, we refer to the term curtailment because at the very beginning, most of the renewable resources were self-scheduling. So when we have to reduce a self-schedule is when we refer to curtailment. But as of the recent years, the participation of renewable resources have evolved, going from having this self-schedule, not wanted to move, into a place where now they are basically economically participating in the market. They are putting a bid, willing and expressing their willingness to to be reduced based on the striking price. In that sense, the term curtailment really doesn't fit anymore very well. And in general, I just refer to reductions of production. Next slide, please. This is the trend that we have for the last 8 years or so for the volume of reduction of renewable production. It is increasing given the fact that we have an increasing volume of renewable energy in the system. And as you have more and more integration of renewable resources, effectively, they are taking a bigger share of the generation mix. And when the system requires resources to be redispatched, either up or down, well, now they are going to be more frequently moved because now they are a bigger share of the supply that is available to do redispatch in the system. For instance, if we have a congestion and we have to redispatch resources, inking resources on one end of the constraint, decking resources on the other end of the constraint. Historically, years back, when we didn't have renewable resources, it would be conventional resources that have to be decked to do the congestion management. Well, with the integration of more and more renewable resources, now we have more and more of those resources that are available to redispatch, even for congestion management. So it's just an inherent consequence of having more resources available to perform the standard redispatch that we need in the system. The breakdown that we have here with the color code goes whether it is a reduction of production because of oversupply conditions, because of congestion conditions, because of reduction of economic bid or self-schedule, or because there was an exceptional dispatch from the operator. As you can see, about 80%, that is the color in blue, stands for the volume of renewable production that is reduced because of congestion relief. There are some ways that we can classify the renewable reductions in oversupply or congestion. We are taking a very simplistic approach that as long as there is congestion reflected in the price, we deem that reduction to be due to congestion. But there may be very well cases where it is because of both, oversupply or congestion. Next slide, please. The renewable reduction of energy most of the time is due to congestion. Now, when we refer to congestion, we also label this as local reduction. That congestion doesn't necessarily mean it's a very localized congestion. It could be a small transmission constraint behind some renewable resources. It could be a major transmission corridor like Path 15. It is in general just referring to congestion holistically. It doesn't make the differentiation whether it is because of very local or widespread congestion in the system. And more critically, because we may have many different constraints binding at the same time, the reduction due to congestion may be a compounded effect of many different effects of different transmission constraints. It's not just one transmission constraint. You may end up with cases where some congestion may be incentivized the resources to move up, while other constraints may be getting the opposite incentive to move resources down. At the end is the net effect, the total, reflected by the marginal congestion component that is going to define whether the resource has to ink or deck. So classification of congestion is a tricky business. Next slide, please. When we expand this from a different angle, we can appreciate the reduction by type of technology and the reason. We mainly have solar and wind, and whether it's going to be oversupply or congestion. If you look at the blue component, that is the solar congestion specifically, that is what takes about 94% of the total production reduction. Effectively, about 94% of the renewable reduction is concentrated in solar because of congestion. The remaining 6% is spread in solar, wind, because either oversupply or congestion for wind. And that is a logical expectation because the majority of the renewable resources that we have in the system happens to be solar. And you have that many solar resources distributed in the system, and basically anytime there is congestion, there may be some resources impacted by that congestion. Next slide, please. This is a geographical reference of where the reduction of renewable resources is happening in the CAISO market footprint. The reference is the map of the California geography, and every dot, every bubble represents one individual resource. And the size and color of the bubble move in the same direction. The more blue the bubble, the larger the reduction of that resource, and the larger the bubble, the larger the reduction of the production of that resource. And this gives you a time series to see how the reduction of renewable resources have evolved over time, going from early 2016, where you can see the bubbles to be relatively small across the board, all the way through 2025. 2025 is the total up to basically mid-June. And yes, over time you have larger bubbles because we have more energy in those areas, and that reflects the increasing levels of renewable reductions that we have in the system. Next slide, please. Along the line of the renewable resources, we have this tracking of the solar production records. We typically observe new records of solar production in the shoulder months. That is when we are coming out of the winter, early springtime, where we start getting these long, sunny days, and we have new resources in the system. So it's very frequent to see breaking records very frequently in this small period of time, anywhere between April all the way potentially to early July. And every dot that is in this trend effectively is a new record of solar production. You can see as early as 2018, we have the records to be very gradual, right? And we move very modestly from one record to the next by a few megawatts. But as we start getting into the recent years, as early as 2022 and more dramatically in 2024, you can see that every new record that comes, even a few days later, is by significant megawatts. So the deltas, the increases of the new records have been very dramatic in the last 3 years. And it's just a reflection of the penetration of the solar resources into the CAISO system. As of now, we are standing over 21,000 megawatts of solar production, when we were last year just hovering under 20,000 megawatts. Last year, 2024 seems to have a year with more records than what we have seen so far in 2025. Next slide, please. This is another way to see the dynamic of renewable resources. And this reflects the percent of load that is served only with renewable resources. Every dot is basically a market, interval in the system. And the axis in Y is effectively the percentage. 80% means that we were able to serve load with 80% of the load was served with renewable resources. Naturally, you are going to see that there are points that are above 100%, meaning there are cases, periods of time, where we are able to serve more than 100% of the load fully with renewable resources. That typically happens in the shoulder months, somewhere between April and late June, early July, because it's the perfect combination of conditions. We have the right moderate load, high levels of renewable productions happening typically in the midday hours of the day. And that is when we get these over 100% values of load served with renewables. As we go out of the shoulder months, these values reduce because now we have higher demands. The level of production remains kind of similar, and we hover anywhere between 40 to 80%. Next slide, please. This is just to put in context when we actually observe these records of load served with renewable resources. And you can see it's in a very narrow time band that happens anywhere between, I would say, around 9 in the morning through, in some cases, late 3 in the afternoon. And that makes sense. Effectively, this is happening in the middle of the day, midday hours, when we have the lowest level of demand and we have the highest level of solar production. So it's the perfect combination to get these records of load served by renewable resources. Next slide, please. Now, there are many ways to portray the dynamics of renewable resources. I just pointed to a couple, that is the solar production record and the percentage of load served with renewables. But you can play in different ways using different combinations and end up with very different statistics. Depending, for instance, what reference you use for load or for the supply, you may end up with very different statistics of the percent of load served with renewables, right? Or you can end up with a percent of load served with clean energies or non-emitting energies. Any definition you take potentially can put you in a different set of statistics that we have to refer to the dynamics of renewable resources impact into the CAISO system. Next slide, please. This is just to keep track of the renewables coupled with the hydro, and yes, we do see higher and higher production of renewable resources that complement the hydro production. Next slide. Let me just cover a couple of slides for storage resources because now they are complementing the dynamics of renewable resources. This is a plain profile, simple average of storage dispatches. Negative values meaning they are charging, positive value means they are discharging, and this is a profile over the day for the last 5 years or so. For 2025, that goes from January 1st through effectively mid-June. So we're still to see potentially the largest deployment of storage later in the summer. But you can see the trend and the evolution over time. We have simply higher level of storage resources just because we have an increasing number of resources in the system, and therefore they can provide more capacity. The main takeaway here is the arbitrage. You can see how nicely they are charging in the middle of the day, so they can be available and discharged in the evening, ramp, and peak. That is precisely the ideal usage of storage resources, displacing moving cheap energy from renewable production in the middle of the day, potentially at negative prices, to be available and complement the resources to meet the ramp and peak conditions of the day. This is exactly how we envision this could work. The other interesting part is that if you look at the early morning, the morning peak starts to become more and more interesting because now it's more significant. We do see some storage resource use in the morning ramp. They may not have that much state of charge to be able to procure a lot of capacity, but it's a new dynamic that we are seeing, that they are meeting not only the evening peak, but also used to help us for the morning peak, mainly in the shoulder months between the winter and the springtime. Next slide, please. This is a duck curve, but overlapping the impact of storage resources. It's kind of complicated to follow through, but if you look at just the shape that is defined with the dark blue line. That is effectively the standard net load curve. If you contrast that with the shape, the trend in yellow line, the yellow line is after you account for the effect of the storage resources. So comparing the two lines, the blue and the yellow, gives you effectively the impact of storage resources integration into the system for how we balance the system after accounting for renewable resources. Effectively, if you look at, for instance, 2025, what we are seeing with the storage resources is that they are increasing the value of the demand curve, right? That is the belly of the duck by that much. And at the same time, they are flattening the peak of the evening. That is when we deploy the storage resources. The end result is that now is a flatter load profile as shown in yellow. Is bringing together the valley with the peak and making it just more flat. And that is an interesting dynamic that is expected to happen given the way storage resources operate in the system. Next slide, please. Just to finish this section, we issue a market notice to communicate that starting effectively June 1st, we migrated some legacy reports. There were two reports, the solar wind report and the curtailment report, that were consolidated into one single report. It's not just the consolidation, it's also the improvement of the technology to provide those reports. It's a dynamic report where you can actually download the information, you can hover and see the different trends, select, disable the trends that you prefer, and it's a superior solution for providing reporting to the marketplace. The report is available on the website. We are providing here the reference where you can find the report. Next slide, please. And I would encourage you to take a peek to the report. It has interesting information about the renewable resources, mainly focused on the profiles of the resources. We extended that not only for the CAISO balancing area, but also for the EIM area. Contains production levels and also curtailment information. And that's all the information we have for this item. And I see already one hand. Yes, Alan, please go ahead.
Hi, Alan Mack, PG&E. Going back to your, is it slide, hang on, let me get this right before I ask you to go back there. Slide 54. Your slide 54 says that 80% of renewable reduction is being driven by economic congestion, but then later on your slides 63 and 64 seem to be implying that batteries are doing a good job of kind of reversing the duck curve and charging the excess renewables and then discharging them during the evening peak and stuff. So I'm kind of confused. It seems like the data is conflicting. What is our storage resources helping to reduce the duck curve effect of renewable energy, or are we still having to curtail due to economic congestion?
Both. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. So let me try to put it this way. The reduction of renewable production, as I indicated, may happen because of too much supply in the system or because of congestion. These are different drivers. The integration of storage resources are helping us to flatten the duck curve because now they can take on that excess of renewable production, right? Effectively, they are going to help us to reduce the renewable production reductions due to oversupply because they can now charge instead of reducing the energy. That is one-to-one effect. What may not be directly correlated is how much the storage resources may help to reduce, to mitigate for the reduction of renewable production due to congestion. That is not an oversupply condition, it's congestion. You may have storage resources located in different parts of the system that yes, they can help to manage congestion, but maybe not enough. And that is the reason that we still have a significant volume of renewable production being reduced, because they still need to be redispatched for congestion relief. The fact that we have storage resources helping us to charge in the middle of the day, it doesn't eliminate, by virtue of being there, the dynamic of congestion.
I see. So the effect that we're seeing on slide 64 is really just getting at that remaining 20% of oversupply conditions, but not really addressing big concern with renewables, it seems like. Is that an accurate way to phrase it?
Yeah, and let me put it this way. If we wouldn't have that much storage resources, the volume of renewable reductions due to oversupply would be much bigger than what we are reporting, because now you don't have that energy to be taken by storage, right? It would have to be reduced.
Mm-hmm. So what's the solution for the 80% problem? Do we need to send our batteries better?
Well, there is a very integrated process that we have, right? And I don't remember in what slide I put that information. It is one of the first slides where I put some reference to the planning. So part of the complication, Alan, is that, as I indicated, as we start switching from conventional resources to new technologies like renewable resources, the only resources that are going to be available to redispatch in the system are going to be those, right? Including the renewable resources. Now they have a larger and larger footprint. Well, there are no other resources to do congestion management, right? Congestion is inherent part of the transmission system. 20 years ago, we have gas, we have to deck gas resources. If now we have solar, well, we have to deck solar resources to do the congestion management. Unless we go into a transmission mode where we relieve every single transmission constraint, right? But then it goes into how effective is that. So the transmission discussion is a more complicated, nuanced discussion to have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Carrie?
Hi, Guillermo. I'm in a terrible location. This is Carrie with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
You are breaking a little bit, but we can try.
All right, let's try. I really appreciate this data. I was very interested in it, and I was wondering on page 64, if I were to think about an associated price chart with 2025 year to date, have you seen similar changes in hourly pricing with maybe the prices also rising in the middle of the day and lowering during the peak, or have prices not been impacted as much?
That's a very interesting topic. I think we can have better metrics for next round, Carrie. I think you're bringing a great point. I can tell you from practical experience, we do see price impacts. And indeed, in a couple of topics down this deck, we're going to actually bring specifically 2 scenarios of how the prices are impacted because of the interplay we have with the storage. But you are looking for a more holistic view. I commit to give you that in the next round of the NPPF.
Okay, thanks so much, Guillermo.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Well, hi, Guillermo. This is really very interesting and, brings forth a lot of questions. And I kind of want to follow up a little bit more on what Alan was speaking to, but maybe it's a little bit more of a suggestion. I look at this and the curtailment data and the sort of the ability of storage for flattening the duck curve, and it strikes me that there's multiple reasons that we are in a position where we're curtailing, and one of those reasons is choices to have energy only contracts versus FCDS contracts, which necessarily will allow the significant overdevelopment in certain areas with the expectation of congestion. But where I really am, interested is not necessarily for you, but how other parts of CAISO are using this information as they're communicating, maybe back to the CPUC with regard to integrated resource planning, with regard to, how resources are being sort of built out in the processes that the CPUC is driving. Because this information is great as long as it's really being used to be, to end up having a more efficient system. And, I sort of put it to CAISO to make sure that this information is part of a feedback loop, so that you're not hoping that someone's using this information, but that you're ensuring that others are using this information. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for the comment, Jonathan. Yeah, the CAISO is actively engaged with the state agencies, and there are processes like the integrated resource planning process and others where CAISO is engaged. So I don't have information to tell you specifically how the information flows or what level of information flows, but we are part of the discussion. So we're always open to share and communicate what we see from the operation of the system. Okay, I think that's all what we have for this section. So now we can move to the next. Hannah?
Yes, thank you, everyone. So we had a bit of a schedule changing, I believe. Or are we having another presentation?
No, we can continue with this presentation. Hannah, it's just different people covering other topics.
Oh, okay, I'm so sorry. Right.
Scott, we are ready.
Great, thanks. So yeah, I'm gonna keep going on some storage topics. I'll be discussing two scenarios in depth. One is some days where we were seeing low state of charge during the evening peak. And then another one where we saw some high prices in the morning that were impacted by some battery movement. So the first issue I'm going to talk about is the low state of charge during the evening peak. We had a couple of days this spring where operations noticed that we had very low state of charge going into the evening peak, and this threw them off a bit. They're expecting these batteries now to provide some of the capacity we need through that evening peak. So when they look and see we have significantly lower state of charge, that can be a bit of a concern to them. So we analyzed a few of these days, and we're going to focus today on March 5th. Overall, what we saw is that we had higher prices through the middle of the day, which minimized the battery charging through these solar hours that we normally see battery charging. And it just led to low state of charge during the evening peak and low battery discharge through those peak hours. Next slide, please. So we're going to compare March 4th and March 5th. So this shows the total state of charge on those 2 days in RTD and in IFM. So IFM is in black there and RTD is in blue. You can see the pretty drastic swing between these 2 days. So on March 4th, we peaked at around 35,000 megawatt hours of state of charge across the battery fleet. And on March 5th, we peaked a little less than 14,000. You can see in IFM, we did predict we would have slightly lower state of charge, but not quite to the same extent that we ended up seeing in the real-time market. Next slide, please. So these two charts compare the actual dispatch on the battery fleet. So you can see we have that lower level of charging through the middle of the day on the 5th. So we're not seeing that normal discharge that you see over there, or sorry, charge that you see over there on the 4th, where we see significant negative total energy schedules on the battery fleet. And that means we don't have the state of charge that we normally see on the evening peak, which you see there on the 4th, where the batteries swing as the solar ramps down. You don't really see that on the 5th, and that's just because we didn't have the state of charge. Next slide, please. So these two charts show the resource fleet across these 2 days. And what you'll see here is the large difference in renewables output. So the renewable output is there in blue. And if you compare that 4th to the 5th in terms of renewable output, you'll see we were just a lot lower on our solar, and the gas and the imports. So imports are in that darker blue and gas is in orange. So those two resource types pick up the slack there on the 5th when we see that big drop in renewables. And we end up seeing that the gas is often marginal and setting a much higher price in real time on the 5th. So with that higher price, we don't see the same levels of battery charging. Next slide, please. This chart again shows the overall battery, both charge and discharge. So in certain hours, we might have some batteries charging, some batteries discharging. And we have the 4th, 5th, and 6th on this slide. On the 5th, you actually see that we have significant battery discharge during parts of the solar hours when we normally see batteries charging. And this was just batteries responding to the economic signals. So prices were higher. If they go above that discharge price, then batteries are going to be dispatched. Next slide, please. These charts show the bid stack in hours ending 9 through 14 on the 4th, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th. The 5th is in green, and really the point we wanted to make here is with that significant reduction in VER output, the supply stack in each of these hours is significantly shorter and higher, and that leads to those higher prices. Next slide, please. So this slide digs into some of the battery bidding that we were seeing in real time on the 4th and on the 5th. So one question we wanted to ask was how the batteries adjust their bids, and are they seeing these IFM results? Are they changing their bids in real time? So we have the SMEC in red here and the RTD dispatch in black. And then you see the bid stack color-coded in both the positive direction, which would be discharge bids, and the negative direction, which would be charge bids. So one thing I want to point out here is if we look at the charge bids, so that's bids below 0, and if we look specifically at the bids in the $50 to $100 range, which is the green bids, kind of darker green bids, there's a significant increase in the number of bids in that $50 to $100 range on the 5th than we saw on the 4th. And that reflects an increase in more aggressive charging bids. So resources are willing to pay more to charge their batteries. But even with that more aggressive charging kind of bid fleet-wide, we still don't see charging of the batteries. And if we look at that red SMEC for a moment, if you look at the SMEC on the 4th, you'll see it follows kind of a predictable pattern with a low SMEC through the solar hours and around $50-ish in the morning and evening before and after the sun comes up. Whereas if you look at on the 5th, that RTD SMEC is pretty constant and not nearly as predictable. So it's much harder for a battery operator to arbitrage across different parts of the day when we have much less predictable prices like we had on the 5th. So if a battery had charged, through the middle of the day here, they might not have seen the same level of profit that they're used to seeing. Next slide, please. This chart compares the IFM and the real-time bids. So we have the IFM bids on the left and the real-time bids on the right. And I wanted to point out that same change there on the $50 to $100 bid range. So we do see the batteries increasing the amount of kind of the aggressiveness of their charging bids. We do see them reacting to some of that in real time. But again, we don't see enough of a swing to cause significant charging through the middle of the day. Next slide, please. So that's all I have on this first issue. We have kind of low state of charge through the evening peak when we see lower VER output through the middle of the day, less fluctuation in prices, and conditions that don't support battery charging through the middle of the day are going to leave us with less state of charge going into the evening peak. I think I'll take questions at the end, so let's go to the next slide. So the second scenario I want to talk about, we're going to change gears here a little bit and look at some price spikes that we saw in RTD in early April. So on April 1st and April 2nd, we saw two RTD price spikes that seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. So if we look at these two charts here, the top one is for April 1st and the bottom one is for April 2nd. Here we have the SMEC across the RTD, HASP, IFM, and FMM markets. And you'll notice we only have price spikes in RTD, and they're quite severe. So everything is looking good in IFM, FMM, HASP, and then all of a sudden in RTD, we see $1,000 prices. So we wanted to dive into these and see what was driving this price spike in RTD in these 2 April days. The first one, we talked about it a little bit earlier. This is when we had that forecasting issue. So we're going to focus our analysis on the second, which was free of any interference from that forecasting issue. Next slide, please. Before we get into that issue, Guillermo mentioned earlier, we've been seeing some changing trends on the morning peak, especially in the kind of winter and spring months. So these two charts show, or these 4 charts show the January through April loads through 2022 to 2025. And the trend we wanted to point out here is that the morning peak has been trending upward in these months. And that has implications for storage resources. So our kind of normal assumption on the storage resources is that they charge through the low price hours in the middle of the day, and then they're available to provide power during the evening peak. But when we start to see morning peaks that are equal to, or in some cases even higher than, the evening peaks. It starts to change how we think about, the storage resources. Save some state of charge. Do they charge a bit overnight? What is that going to look like? Next slide, please. This chart compares the evening peak and the morning peak, and we look at a bunch of days here, which are those rings, and the lighter rings are rings closer to today. And what we see here is just that there seems to be a progression towards higher and higher morning peaks, where the morning peak is equal to or even higher than the evening peak during these winter and spring months. Next slide, please. We see that real-time prices, they reflect those overall supply and demand conditions. So with a higher morning peak, we see a higher real-time price in the morning. Again, these charts compare 2022 to 2025. In January, we've seen some more extreme conditions in certain years. But overall, we've been kind of trending towards that morning peak price being equal to or greater than the evening peak price. Next slide, please. So now we're going to dive into this example here from April 2nd, where we saw the SMEC jump from $50 at 6:15 to $1,000 at 6:35. So to set the stage a little bit, this price spike impacted almost the whole WEIM other than the Pacific Northwest. So the Pacific Northwest was insulated from these price spikes, while the rest of the WEIM was seeing $1,000 prices. The main drivers of these price spikes ended up being large VER forecast differences between FMM to RTD and low battery state of charge. We end up kind of really having to squeeze out the last and most expensive bits of state of charge from our batteries in this 4.2 example, and we'll get into that more in a bit. Next slide, please. So we're going to start here with the VER differences. So this chart shows the RTPD and RTD VER forecasts along different time frames in the market. So starting with this blue dashed line, this blue dashed line is showing the VER forecast or VER cleared megawatts in the 630 binding FMM interval, which is the hour-ending 8 HASP case. So this is telling us what we think the VERs are going to do as of this 630 binding FMM interval in both the binding interval and in all of the advisory intervals in this one market case. The solid lines down here show what we actually ended up having in the RTD cases, both for the binding interval, which would be the first interval in the RTD cases, and then in all of the advisory intervals in each of those RTD cases. So what you can see here clearly is that we were very optimistic in our VER forecast. So if we compare just the binding case or the binding interval here, this is the binding 630 case for FMM, and we're about 1,000 megawatts higher in FMM than we end up getting in RTD. So that's a 1,000 megawatt swing that we have to make up in RTD. However, the advisory intervals have even more severe differences between the kind of what we're predicting for the VERs and then what we end up getting in RTD. And those advisory results can end up impacting the binding interval, both through state of charge management and also when we're thinking about dispatch, they can, decide whether or not it looks like we're going to need to commit resources further out in the future when we look at those advisory results. So those advisory results are also quite important. So overall, the point I want to make on this slide is we're very optimistic in our FMM VER forecast, and we were kind of caught with much lower VER coming in RTD. Next slide, please. So here I want to make a point about battery opportunity costs. So the market optimizes every resource over the whole course of the market run. And when a battery has limited state of charge, the market is going to try to pick the intervals with the highest price to use that state of charge. And when we get down to a low enough level of fleet-wide state of charge, where we're having to hold batteries for future intervals where the price is higher and we no longer have enough state of charge to cover the earlier intervals, that difference in price and the battery opportunity cost of holding that state of charge for later higher price intervals can end up setting the price in the binding cases. So this is one way that batteries can create conditions where the advisory intervals have more of an impact on the binding interval prices. Next slide, please. So this is the dynamic that we saw in the 635 case, which is the first interval with $1,000 prices on April 2nd. So this first interval is the only binding interval of the case. And then in these charts, we're looking out at the battery bid curves with available state of charge in each interval of that 635 case. So starting with the binding energy interval and then going through the rest of the advisory intervals. The red line shows where we're clearing on that battery bid stack. So what we see if we look at this first case is we actually clear at a pretty low price on the battery bid stack. But by the time we get out into the hour ending 8 intervals, in this 7 o'clock and 7:05 interval, we have to dip into $1,000 priced batteries to cover our load. And the opportunity cost of saving that state of charge for these later intervals is what ends up setting the price in that 635 case. Next slide, please. So one question we had looking at this is we procure the FlexRamp product to deal with these types of uncertainty. And this is a case where that uncertainty materialized and we needed that FlexRamp product and it didn't seem like we were getting it. So we wanted to do a deeper dive on why we weren't seeing that FlexRamp product when we needed it here on April 1st and April 2nd. So this chart here shows the FlexRamp procurement by resource type. And you can see that light blue color is the batteries, and they dominate a big portion of the FlexRamp procurement across these 2 days, specifically in those morning hours when we ended up needing it. Next slide, please. So this chart shows the amount of FMM FlexRamp that we procured and how much we actually utilized in RTD for all resource types, and then drills down more specifically into the batteries. So in FMM, we procure FlexRamp up, and we expect that capacity to then be available to be released in RTD and hopefully utilized when uncertainty materializes in cases like this. So starting with this top chart here, if we look at the FMM FRU procurement. The overall pass group procurement was about 1,200 megawatts, and about 700 megawatts of that was procured from batteries. And then if we look at what actually got utilized, we see that only about 314 megawatts of that 1,200 ended up getting utilized in RTD. And we only get about 100 from batteries. So looking at the reason behind that big unutilized battery FRU kind of megawatt amount, what we saw is that more than 90% of the batteries that ended up being unutilized were unutilized due to insufficient state of charge. So this was back on April 1st and 2nd, or this example specifically is from the 2nd. So this is before we put in that FRU state of charge enhancement that Quinn talked about. Next slide, please. So we reran this case with a counterfactual using that new logic from the FRU state of charge enhancement. And we found that when we use the new logic, we see a big drop in the amount of FRU that's procured from the batteries. So with that new logic, the batteries procure only 70 megawatts of FRU, and we see the GNRC and water fuel types picking up the slack for the batteries. Next slide, please. This chart just shows the overall RTPD FRP that was not delivered in RTD by reason type in each interval, each RTD interval. We had a missed market run here at 7, which is why that bar is missing. And this orange shows that kind of the amount that the state of charge was contributing to that undelivered RTD FRP. So while it accounts for a significant amount of the undelivered FRP, it doesn't account for all of it. Some of the pass group FRP gets procured in the Pacific Northwest, which, as I mentioned earlier, was in a low price bubble in this example. And it had some constraints that were limiting flows, so we could not use the FRP that was procured in that area. We also have some batteries, especially in some of these later cases here, where they have a high bid price. They have a bid price of close to $1,000. So we might have the flex available from those resources to use in dispatch, but we don't end up needing them. We don't actually go infeasible in any of these cases. We just have very high prices. So there is a difference there. We don't see any CAISO infeasibilities, just prices at or near $1,000. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of what we just talked about. Overall, we saw that large VER forecast deltas between FMM and RTD are what create the tight conditions in RTD. And then we see a limited state of charge across the battery fleet and a lack of FRU availability, partly due to that limited state of charge, and the old logic, which was not properly accounting for state of charge in awarding the FRP. That is it for me, so I'll open it up to any questions on either issue.
I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, here we go. Alva has a hand raised.
This is Alva at PG&E. Thank you so much for this detailed postmortem. I would just wanted to suggest that this is also appropriate to be talked about in terms of storage enhancements. So I'm hoping that some of the information that you're providing here will feed into thoughts about how to either change the battery model or make other changes that could be appropriate to considering in the Storage Enhancements Initiative. Thanks very much for this.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Alva. Yeah, we're definitely sharing these results internally as well, so definitely be in consideration in those other topics as well.
We have another hand raised by Kathleen.
Thanks, Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. While Alva was giving a shout out, I decided to jump in with my own. This is really helpful. I also really appreciate the postmortem. It means a lot to me to have actual data put behind kind of a more general problem statement that has been previously floated. So thank you very much for your time and effort. My pitch or my shout out is in the policy roadmap when we were kind of talking about what are the future policy processes we might have. I'll say the only one that we really threw our hands up for was FRP enhancements and kind of similar concept, but I think that a lot of the data you're showing, I just want to encourage you to keep providing additional deep dives like this and scenarios, and hopefully we get to a place where we're kind of revisiting some of this, because I see other things that you're raising here, especially with the deliverability on the PNW. And I know we got rid of our minimum requirement. So I just think that this is raising a lot for me, and I'm hoping that it's adding some extra weight to that future conversation I hope to have. And again, thank you so much. This is very helpful.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Kathleen.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised and no questions in the chat.
Great. Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
We can go to the next slide.
Yep, next slide, please. Cool. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kyle Pelham. I am an analyst on the market analysis team, and today we're going to go over a few brief metrics, in relation to IFM congestion rents and CR performance over the last quarter. So, next slide, please. Yeah, so to kick things off, we have the monthly sum of congestion rents in the day-ahead market starting back from January 2023. Just a big call out, we see the outlier from the winter event in January 2024, where winter storm in the Pacific Northwest caused the Malin Intertide to bind heavily in the export direction. So just calling out the outlier there, since that will show up in the following slides. So just to clarify there, focusing in on the months that are most in scope for this Q2, looking at March 2025 to May 2025, of comparison to where we were at last year. The summary is that we're very much in the ballpark of where we were, but we're down about 20%. We're at 80% of what we were seeing congestion rent wise to what we saw this quarter back in 2024. So just keeping that in mind. So next slide, please. Yep. So again, looking at congestion rent totals, but we're looking at it from a slightly different angle this time. We're faceting it out by year and summing up by hour of the day, primarily to look at the overall profile that we're seeing congestion rents collect. And as you notice, the same profile is consistent from year to year. We see, the highest amount of rents, happening on peak on solar hours with a fatter right tail for the evening peak. And, as we go year to date, we're 5 months into 2025, and we're seeing, similar shape that, we would expect to see. As far as magnitude goes, over the last couple of years on some of those peak hours, we're seeing, the upper range hitting, 50 million. And so far, 5 months into 2025, we're saying, you know, around 19 to 25 million for those on-peak hours. So we'll continue to watch this as the year progresses. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now getting into overall CRR performance, I'm going to focus in primarily on CRR notional value and CRR adjusted payment. You know, similarly to that first slide that we looked at, the CRR adjusted payment across this quarter is right at 80% of what we saw last year. But one thing to note is that the ratio of adjusted payment to notional value this time around is a lot tighter. We're up from a revenue adequacy percentage. We're up 8% from last quarter, you know, for 2025. So just keeping a high level here. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we're looking at the performance of pro rata funding in relation to allocation to measured demand. So what we have here in the blue is what we're seeing, you know, today. This is with pro rata funding. This is the net of the allocation to measured demand. And then on the green side, we have a counterfactual of what this would look like with no pro rata funding enabled. So what you're seeing here is that, you know, as we continue down the road, pro rata funding still is eliminating uplift to demand for revenue adequacy, and you know, it's allowing surplus to be allocated back to measured demand. Yeah, that's all I have on this section. So I'll go ahead and you know, take any questions on these brief updates. If not, we can pass to the next group.
I'm not seeing any hands raised. And no questions in the chat.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Yep. Ikram, you might be muted, I think.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Ikram Lagawide for Market Analysis Team. I'll be presenting assistant energy transfer with another topic, which is flex ramping. Next slide, please. A little bit of background on the flex ramping test, which is part of the resource efficiency evaluation, and is to ensure participants have sufficient requirements in ramping. So this slide represents the flex ramping up test failures, meaning that the BAA failed to have sufficient output ramping capabilities. So the heat map represents the percentages of flex up ramping failures from September 2024 till May 2025. For this year, the maximum percentage flex ramp up is 2.9% for IPCL. One thing to mention, the colors go from light blue to the dark blue, which represent the smallest percentage, which is 0, to the highest percentage, is 7.2. That happened in November 2024 when PNM fell. The next slide, please. This one represents the flexible ramping down, which indicates that the BAA failed the test requirements for ramping down. This is also a heat map representing the percentage of flex ramping down. Start from minimum value, which is 0 as a light blue, all the way to the darkest shade of blue, which is the maximum percentage of flex down from September 2024 to May 2025. For this year, the highest percentage of flex down occur in February 2025 for LADWP, and for a year of 2024, 2.2% and 2.1% was the highest percentage of failing the test for 2 entities. Next slide, please. The purpose of assistant energy transfer is to leverage WAM for energy assistance to provide operational benefits. The graph for visualization show six WAM balancing areas that opt in, which I would say 5 BAs that opt in from March 1st all the way to May 31st every day. And then we have 1 BA that opts in for the last 2 weeks of May. Some of these BAs are opt in and failed the test, the other opt in and didn't fail the test. Next slide, please. When a BA opts in and fails the RSC test, there is a surcharge that is applied to the net import. This graph represents the surcharge from March 1st to May 31st. We have high and lows throughout those 3 months. The highest day was March 17, which passed the surcharge of $50,000. And then we have the minimum value, which occurred March 28th, within the hundreds of the dollars. To mention the total AAG surcharge for these 3 months were about approximation of $150,000 for all the BAs that opt in on that previous slide that I showed. Next slide. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I'm not seeing any hands raised and no questions in the chat.
Thank you. I'll give it back to Quinn.
Thank you. Thank you, Ikram. This is Quinn again, market analysis. I'm taking the load conformance section. Next slide, please. Load conformance is a tool that operators can use to modify the final load requirement, or what we say the demand that the market optimization clears the supply against. And operators may use it based on projected or observed system conditions, and normally a positive value effectively increases the demand while a negative value decreases the demand. This is a topic that has been discussed at length in the previous MPPFs. So today we're giving just a short update on this with some new data from the recent months. We start with this day-ahead market RUC process average load conformance through the years January 2022 through mid-June-ish, up to when we cut off the data collection. So mid-June-ish, we've seen these up and down through the trend. Some summer conditions, 2022 summer conditions come back in 2024. That's when we saw high values showing up on this chart. There was a blank period somewhere in June, before July 2023. That was a pilot program where we tried to see what we lose from the market if we do not use RUC adjustment at all. So that was the blank period as a pilot program for that testing period. And right after that, we went ahead with this implementation of the programmatic calculation that guided the RUC adjustment. So that was showing up as sustained high values July through December 2023 because we were using 97.5% percentiles for all the time for that period, all hours of the day essentially. And by January 2024, RUC adjustment values came down after an enhancement to that guidance logic. And after around May 2024-ish, we have seen normal behaviors since then until now. So more recent updates coming from the spring months going into the beginning of summer. March to May timeframe, the RUC adjustment has been minimum. And starting summer, essentially June, start of the June, we start to see some degree of RUC adjustment coming back to the picture. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the metric we track to complement the RUC adjustment, essentially RUC bid cost recovery or BCR breakdown by market, and we focus on the red, which is RUC allocation. So why we track this is by placing in extra RUC adjustment, the market will try to procure up to the higher levels of requirement we ask for. And we may be committing extra long start units, and this commitment becomes binding from day ahead to real time. And going into the real time, when we need to keep the commitment, some of these decisions may not be economical given the market conditions. So RUC BCR allocation was relatively high during the pilot program, showing up the same months of the year, July through December 2023. And coming from January 2024 and on, the RUC allocation has been stable and relatively low until now. Next slide, please. Another view is these hourly profiles. We have Q1 through Q4 subcharts, and each of the subplot has a monthly average line that's hourly average RUC conformance for the month. And we have 2-year comparisons in each of the charts. So from Q3 and Q4, we're not in Q3 and Q4 yet this year. So 2025 is not there, it's 2023 versus 2024. We saw that sustained high values showing up during the pilot program again. And the values has been down last year, showing up as normal in some of the hours if we don't expect net load uncertainty from the day ahead perspective, then the RUC adjustment are essentially zero for some of the hours. And coming to this year, January through March on the Q1 chart 2025, RUC adjustment has been really low. And the latest one is June 2025, the green line in Q2 subchart. We start to show some momentum there, reflecting the summer conditions. Next page, please. In addition to day ahead monitoring and BCR monitoring, we'll also look at the real-time load bias, load conformance. This is daily average HASP load conformance. The real-time load conformance are really there for resource position and sometimes ramping conditions or for certain events and hedging and stuff. So there are different reasons why the real-time load conformance is in place. Looking at the latest months of the year, there was a spike, there was a spike in October 2024 that was not marked. So that was a fire. So it was a hedging for a fire. And then fast forward to March 2025, there was another spike. So that was a day with high unscheduled flow, and we had 500 kV outages. So RUC adjustment was aimed for that. Other than that, the rest of the days look normal in scale. I think that is the end of my section. So any questions, comments?
No hands raised.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, thank you. I'll hand it over to Mihir.
Thanks, Gwen. Let's go to the next slide, please. let's start with the SMEC prices, and what we're seeing here on the y-axis, dollars per megawatt hour. Prices reached about $150 per megawatt hour back in January 2023, but in the winter months and especially in the spring months, we can see that the prices have stayed low and stable for the last few months here in the spring. And that's across all markets: IFM, RTD, and RTPD. Let's keep going to the next slide. This slide shows the real-time prices in the Western EIM market, and we can see a similar trend in the spring months. The prices are low and stable compared to the winter months. We are also seeing that there's dotted lines represent the Mid-C bilateral price and the Palo Verde bilateral price. The dotted lines, there's some correlation with the real-time prices in the WIM for certain regions. For instance, the price that we see around January 2025 at Palo Verde seems to correlate with higher prices in California and in the Central Mountain region. However, not always, like we see with the Mid-C bilateral price, a spike in February, which isn't wrongly tied with the price spike for any of the regions. Okay, let's keep going to the next slide. This slide shows the gas prices for next day at the PG&E and SoCal Citygate hubs, main hubs in California. And the prices have remained low so far this spring and in 2025, although there was some spike around mid-January to late January. But overall, the prices have stayed below $4.29 per MMBTU since then. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This slide is showing gas prices for next day trading at other hubs, including PG&E and SoCal Citygate. We see similar trends where after initial elevated levels in mid to late January, the prices are stabilized. The other observation is that prices are more volatile than they were at a similar period a year ago. For instance, you can see with the Northwest Sumas hub that in the last few months since March, it's been trending up and down from sometimes 50 cents to up to $2.50 per MMBTU. The spike we see in January, mid-January, for the Henry hub, the SoCal Citygate, the El Paso mainline hub, I believe was weather-driven. Let's go to the next slide, please. This slide shows the futures gas price, and the y-axis is showing the dollar per MMBTU gas price for delivery in each of the 3 months of April, May, and June. This data starts back in January 1st up until the end of May. We see the trends are showing that the futures gas prices initially rose up until mid-March. After mid-March, we saw a drop in the price, followed by another spike around the end of April, beginning of May for June 2025 delivery, and then back down. The interesting key point to note that I want to make is around the drop that we see here in March. This is around the same time when tariff announcements were made, and subsequently we see a lot of uncertainty and volatility in the prices. Also, remember this is the spring season, shoulder season, with low cooling demands, and typically prices are expected to show up at low levels. Indeed, compared to last year, 2024, the futures gas price remains similar, around $3 to $4 per MMBTU. Let's go to the next slide, please. This slide is showing next day bilateral power prices, but for on-peak. And we're seeing the prices for Mid-C, NP15, Palo Verde, and FP15. Takeaway here is the power prices remained fairly stable and low for the spring season and comparable to a year ago, as shown. Let's go to the next slide, please. For future on-peak bilateral power prices, we see a similar trend as what we observed with gas prices. Prices rose up until mid-March, experienced a big drop, and then started climbing again. The power prices in comparison to a year ago are similar, if not slightly lower than they were in 2024 for futures in the same time frame. Let's go to the next slide, please. So that was gas prices and power prices. Now let's take a look at the market costs that are informed by gas and power prices in addition to various other factors. The y-axis has two axes. The left one is for the total cost to the market, millions of dollars, and the right axis is the average cost in dollars per megawatt hour. The prices in 2025 spiked in January, January 21 specifically, as you can see here. And since then, prices have dropped off. However, as we will see more clearly in the next slide, the prices in May and April were higher this year than they were in 2024, the cost, excuse me. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. This slide represents the same data, the total cost of the market, but grouped by month in different years. For May and April 2025, the monthly total cost is higher than it was in 2024. However, for January, the trend was the other direction, where 2024 was higher than 2025. And so, as we'll see in the next slide, where we sum it up by quarter, we can go to the next slide. We can see that the Q1 2025 total cost was less than the Q1 2024 total cost. The Q2 2025 total cost is lower than the 2024 total cost in Q2 because Q2 2025 only includes 2 months. It does not include the third month. Overall, Q1 2025 were $2 billion lower than Q1 2024 total cost. Okay, just a couple more slides. Let's keep going. Next slide, please. This slide shows the real-time congestion offset costs and the real-time imbalance energy offset costs. The real-time congestion offset cost starting from November has fallen with some rise that we've seen in the last 2 months of April and May. Meanwhile, real-time imbalance energy costs has stayed very low for several months leading back to the end of last summer. Let's keep going. Next slide, please. This slide shows the real-time congestion offset for WEAM entities. Meanwhile, the previous slide was for ISO. We see a similar trend where the congestion offset has dropped, and the biggest contributor or the biggest allocation of the real-time congestion offset was to the Pacific Northwest, about 66%. And we detail the BAAs that are included in each of the 4 regions. Okay, let's keep going. Last slide here. The real-time imbalance energy offset has been low. This is similar to what we saw with the ISO imbalance energy offset as well. That is all I have. If there are not any questions, we can go to the next topic.
Yep, I'm not seeing any hands raised. And no questions in the chat.
Next slide, please. Next slide. So I'm going to review the amount of price corrections that we've had in recent years. You can see this is a trend from 2022 to 2025, showing the number of market intervals that had a price correction, whether one P node or all P nodes over the past few years. We did have a high amount of price corrections in 2022 and 2023, and that has come down to lower levels in more recent years. Next slide. This is another trend of price correction, unique events. So the vertical axis has a very different numbering system here. You can see for ones that we categorize as only impacting the CAISO area, we tend to have a few unique price corrections per month. We like to categorize those in 4 different ways. Number 1 is process events, which can also fall in the data error events, but we like to call those out because those can be outage modeling or constraint enforcement errors that the ISO can probably improve internally to improve those events. We have software events where our software isn't working as expected. And then we have data error events, events like the load forecast error that Amber and Scott discussed earlier in this presentation. And then the final category is tariff inconsistency. Next slide. We also track price corrections related to our WEIM market. These corrections may only impact one entity at a time, and as new entities have entered the market over the years, these corrections can be high, and then we've brought them down to lower levels in more recent years. Next slide. So we communicate price corrections in a variety of ways. We have reports on OASIS, 2 reports. We post price correction messages as soon as we know we're going to correct. And then we also post a price correction summary once we've processed that correction. If you join the biweekly market update calls with me on Thursday, we do discuss price correction events. I do mention sort of the major ones that would impact like the whole system, or ones that are, for an extended amount of time. Next slide. And so going back to that first trend in 2022 and 2023, we would correct. We had an issue with pricing multi-contingencies, a software defect impacting the price formation. And so when those constraints would bind at too high of a price, we would correct them back down to the $1,000 penalty price. But in January 2024, we got the software fix from our vendor. And so you can see why that trend went down. We don't have to correct as many intervals for that specific multi-contingency price formation issue. Of course, we continue to validate all high shadow prices, and just reminding everybody that high shadow prices can still occur, and these can often result in LMPs above the soft offer cap or above $1,000. Sometimes we get tickets about that, but congestion can make those prices quite high. When we have resources with very low shift factors with respect to the transmission constraints that are economically awarded to mitigate that congestion. I think there's a hand up.
We have a hand raised from Alan.
Hi, Alan Meck, PG&E. I'm a little interested in the discrepancy between slide 121 and slide 122. I see that there are a number of, in slide 121, process errors which you described as kind of opportunities for potential improvements to KYSO processes, but then no process errors in slide 122. So I'm wondering which slide 122 is the WEIM market corrections, price corrections. And so I'm wondering, are all of these process errors in the day ahead market?
No, you know, the ISO, we enforce a lot more constraints and model outages for our control area. And so that is all work that our staff does, and there can be errors in that. Now, WEIMs do have the discretion to decide what constraints are modeled for their areas, and they can enable those. And they can communicate to us if there was an error with those, but we don't receive that type of communication.
Okay.
Okay, next slide.
I'll just, this is Abhishek here. We're almost done with the market performance slides. I just wanted to provide an update on the max burn gas nomogram. Can we go to the next slide? So there was a planned gas curtailment that happened in the, a localized gas curtailment that happened in the San Diego region, and through the communication between SoCalGas and the market operator and the ISO operator, they had decided to enforce the gas nomogram from May 19th to May 22nd. This is more of a constraint that is impacting from the reliability on the gas side of the constraint, which can be modeled in the market. So we had enforced this constraint starting from May 19th to May 22nd in all the markets in the day-ahead, RTPD, and the RTD market. In the day-ahead market, we had enforced for all the hours in the IFM market. However, in the RTPD and the RTD, since the planned curtailment process was done earlier, and we had enforced it till about hour ending 18 on May 22nd. Can you go to the next slide? So this just provides, there are too many variables on this one, but this provides how the nomogram was cleared in the market. This particular nomogram, in this particular situation, the max burn gas nomogram that is for San Diego was more of a flat limit across all the hours. This was basically because of the communication between the gas company and the ISO. It was decided that they wanted a flat profile across all the hours for all the days, and that limit was about 415, as you can see in the red dotted line in this particular chart. The nomogram was not binding in the IFM side. However, it was binding only for about 4 to 5 intervals in the real time. So when you can see that there was minimal impact from binding from this particular, because of the situation, because of the system conditions, there was smaller impact in the real time conditions as well. So just wanted to provide an update on this one. Any questions?
Yeah, we do have a hand raised from Kathleen.
Great, thank you. Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Thanks, Abhishek. A quick question for you. I'm blanking on like what the notification process and or posting, maybe on Oasis, in the operational time frame is when you decide to trigger the gas burn nomogram. Can you just remind us, how does that work?
So on the external communication or between the internal communication?
External, yes, sir.
I think this is similar to any other process that we have for nomograms, but I need to check from the operators what is the messaging, how far in advance do they provide the messaging? Because this, you have to again realize this is more happening in the real-time conditions as well, in the sense that this was a planned curtailment, and they were deciding on what the limit would be and what the situation is in those conditions. So I have to check with the operators what the messaging in advance would be.
Yeah, that would be helpful. What I took away from what you just said is that your gut is it's likely like on Oasis in one of the messages and then posted on there. Okay, no, that's super helpful. But if you can confirm that, that would be great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, that's it.
Okay, hello everybody. This is Jessica Stewart. I'm a senior energy meteorologist on the forecasting team here at the ISO, and I'll be going over some renewable forecast accuracy deep dives that we performed relating to 2025 renewable accuracy. Next slide, please. So just starting off with some of the real-time solar forecast accuracy by month. We've got 2023 on here in that maroon color, 2024 in gray, and 2025 in blue. And you can see, so for the months of January and February in 2025, we did see forecast improvements compared to both 2023 and 2024. However, the months of March through May, we did see a little bit of a decrease in that forecast accuracy. So forecasting has done some digging into what could be causing this increase in forecast error over the last couple of months. And we've kind of highlighted a couple potential causes and some periods that we're looking into a little bit further. Next slide, please. So the first period that we focused on was the solar on-ramp, particularly from 6 a.m. through 10 a.m. And during this period, solar comes online very quickly, which causes a very steep on-ramp during the morning hours, which is also often when load is increasing as well. So because of this really sharp on-ramp in solar, the forecast error is amplified. So anytime we've got any error in forecast, we see it can very quickly lead to a deviation. And this is a high period of interest for us just because of that very quick period. We have such a large amount of solar coming on. So it's worth noting here that typically we present our graphs in MAPE or percent error. However, the graphs down here show average megawatt error and not percent error. This is because there's been a large growth in the solar fleet over the years. Guillermo talked on that a bit earlier. So the observed error isn't as significant in the percent error calculation. So we're focusing here on the megawatt error because at the end of the day, it's also that megawatt error that's felt by the operators and the grid. So we've decided to show the hourly average megawatt error here instead of the percent error. So in 2025, which is the lightest color on the graphs, we've got RTD on the left side and FMM or RTPD on the right side. And we see that there has been an increase in the average megawatt error for 2025 compared to 2023 and 2024, especially for that hour ending 9 hour, which is the hour of 8 to 9 a.m. Most of this we've seen as a high bias, meaning that the forecast is higher than where actuals end up coming in. And Scott kind of talked about that, where the forecast in some of those further out horizons has been a little bit high, and then we end up having less coming in some of the real-time and actual horizons, which is causing some issues. So this is a period that we're actively working on researching and ways to decrease this megawatt error, but we just wanted to kind of touch on it a little bit and notice that it's something that we're observing a period of increased forecast error, and we're digging into as this is a high period of interest to us. Next slide, please. So another item that is contributing to this increase in solar forecast error that we're taking a look at is the follow DOT flags and the quality of the telemetry data received by the resources. So we know there's been a large growth in solar over the years. The graph here on the right shows an increase in the solar capacity from 2020 through present. Our current capacity of solar is about 21,000 megawatts. One item to note on this graph is that the standalone solar capacity in green has actually decreased over the years, while that co-located capacity continues to increase and has grown quite significantly since co-located resources were introduced in 2021. And this is important because co-located resources receive more frequent follow DOT orders than standalone solar resources. This is because for co-located resources, any resource ID behind that aggregated capability constraint, or ACC, which receives a follow DOT instruction, requires then all that resources behind that ACC to also follow their DOT. So follow DOT orders, as well as these bad data quality flags, cause data invalidation, meaning that the telemetry data from the resource during these periods where the resources are either required to follow their DOT or the resource is reporting bad quality telemetry data is being flagged out and not being used in the forecast training. So if this is happening for long periods or very frequently for resources, it can have an impact on forecast accuracy because we're invalidating large periods of telemetry data that could otherwise be used in a forecast training. Another item that happens when there are the follow DOT orders or bad telemetry data quality is that persistence turns off in RTD and we switch over to the external vendor forecast instead. In 2025, so far through May, persistence has been shown to be up to 30 to 50% more accurate than the external vendor forecast. So if either of these items are happening often or for long periods across potentially thousands of megawatts on the solar fleet, especially those co-located resources, which are receiving those follow DOT orders frequently, it can have a significant impact on forecast accuracy, consistently switching off of persistence, which is 30 to 50% more accurate, and then over to the less accurate external vendor forecast. In 2025, we've noted that all solar resources have received follow DOT instructions 2% more through the months of January through May compared to 2024 during the same time period. And co-located solar resources have so far this year received follow DOT orders 12.5% more than standalone solar resources through 2025. So that's just more intervals where these resources are on that less accurate external vendor forecast than on that persistence in RTD. So that's likely one of the things that is contributing to that increased solar error that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So how can resources work to improve the renewable accuracy? The first piece that you guys can help us with is ensuring that the telemetry, HSL, and meteorological station data coming from the resources is all in good quality. If that telemetry quality flag coming from the rig indicates that the telemetry data is not in good quality, persistence will also turn off and switch to the less accurate vendor forecast. So ensuring good quality telemetry from the rig is crucial for keeping persistence on, which gets a more accurate forecast in those real-time horizons. Bad data quality can also impact the vendor forecast. It's like a double whammy if there's bad data quality. The vendor forecast uses telemetry data, meteorological data, and HSL data to train the forecast. So if there are prolonged periods where any of these points are in bad data quality, it can have an impact on the forecast training and then the forecast quality that you receive. So this is especially true for resources that receive frequent follow DOT orders like co-located resources. So if there's frequent periods where the telemetry is being invalidated, and then we're having to rely on meteorological station data, and that's also in bad quality, it can have a larger impact on the forecast than if just the telemetry was bad quality and the meteorological station data was good quality. So really having all three of these pieces in good quality can significantly help improve the forecast. Another piece that can assist with forecast quality is providing good quality HSL data. I'll get into what good quality HSL data means on the next slide, but just a quick refresher on HSL is that it's a required point for co-located VERS, hybrid VER components, and any VERS wanting to provide ancillary services. It's currently not required, however, it is highly encouraged for standalone resources. And it is essentially the telemetry without market impacts. So no battery charging or supplemental dispatch, operating instructions, ancillary service are taken into the HSL calculation. So that way the ISO, we have visibility into what the resource could generate just based off of those weather conditions alone without all of these market impacts. So because there are no market impacts, then the HSL can be used during those periods where the follow DOT flag is active to help keep good actual information feeding into the real-time forecast. So even though we can't use that telemetry data, we still have a source of actual information that can be fed to the vendors to allow them to have a point to feed into their forecast and help keep the forecast more accurate and kind of training off of the observed data instead of using some of the weather forecast or meteorological station data. So this can help improve the vendor forecast training to have good quality HSL data. Unfortunately, the ISO has observed a variety of challenges in receiving accurate and reliable HSL values from resources. And if we go to the next slide, I will go through just a few examples of what good quality HSL data looks like. Next slide, please. So currently, the ISO, we're not able to turn on HSL persistence-based forecasting for standalone or co-located VERS that are eligible persistence due to a variety of HSL issues. Right now, our persistence forecasting is using the telemetry information, and if telemetry is in bad quality or there's a follow DOT flag, we'll switch to the vendor forecast. We do have the ability to use HSL instead of telemetry. However, due to some of these data issues, we haven't been able to turn that on. So before we can turn on that HSL-based persistence, we need to ensure that there's quality HSL data coming from the fleet so we can help create a more accurate RTD forecast, and we're not impacting our RTD forecast in a negative way or making it less accurate by feeding it the HSL instead. So we're currently seeking ways to ensure quality HSL data from resources, and we're doing that through the storage design and modeling initiative, which I believe is a call on Monday if more folks are interested in how we're doing this and kind of planning on introducing this. You can follow that initiative. So some of the qualities of good HSL data that can be used to help improve the forecast are ensuring the HSL doesn't react to follow DOT orders, such as supplemental dispatch, operating instructions, battery charging. This is shown on the graph on the far left. There's some supplemental dispatch. We can see the telemetry is in red is being impacted by that, but that HSL up in pink is not impacted by those market dispatches, and that forecast can remain up there and is still fed off of that good HSL information to keep us on a more accurate forecast during those periods of market dispatches. Another is to check that the HSL is aligned with telemetry when there are no follow DOT orders in place, such as the middle graph. So this HSL shows what the resource could produce based on only weathering conditions and not include market impacts. So ideally, if there are no market impacts present, then the HSL and the telemetry should be approximately the same. So that's shown in the middle graph and helps to feed the forecast during those intervals. And finally, an example of the graph on the right, the HSL in pink is high bias compared to the telemetry in red. So when we have HSL high bias, this can lead to the forecast being high biased. And while this graph on the right is only an example of one resource, if similar issues are happening across the entire thousands of megawatts of the fleet, which we saw, we've got many thousand megawatts of co-located resources on the system right now, all providing HSL. So you can imagine if something like this is happening across thousands of megawatts of resources on the fleet, it can lead to a high bias forecast on the entire system, which we think is one of the causes in that increased RTD and FMM ramp error we saw on the first slide. So that's one of the things that we're looking into, but just shows the importance of ensuring quality HSL data coming to the ISO and how it can affect the forecast in all horizons and then have downstream impacts as well. So that is all I have for my slides. So I will pause and see if there are any questions on the renewable forecast accuracy piece.
We do have a hand raised from Chris.
Hey there, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. This is Chris Devin with Terragen. So I just wanted to maybe make a comment on this follow DOT flag issue. And I think, this is something that CAISO had done through its operating procedures changes. It really wasn't vetted in the policy space at all in the stakeholder initiative. So just wanted to advocate perhaps that this is an issue that should be scoped into the storage design and modeling initiative as well. I believe, you know, you mentioned the point about the HSL changes and that issue. Certainly seems to be a good item to address some of these concerns, but I think there's a broader policy level discussion that needs to happen on the follow dot flag, because there's a lot of instances where really when you have AS on these co-located units that it doesn't necessarily need to have a follow DOT flag. And you know, I've talked with the CAISO about this several times for years, and it's really never been discussed fully with the stakeholder community. So I just wanted to put in a bit of advocacy here to see if we could, you know, potentially get that raised. I know some other stakeholders have noted this as well. So you know, we would like to see that discussed in that initiative, you know, at some point as well. So I'll leave it at that, but I appreciate the you know, additional information here and showing how this is an issue beyond just the economic impact on the supply side, but also on the CAISO's visibility and forecasting side. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a hand raised from Rahul.
Hi, Jessica. This is Rahul from AES. Could you confirm you can hear me?
Yep.
So the question I have is related to HSL and co-located asset. It was my high-level understanding that HSL was a telemetry required only for hybrids. Could you shed some light into if solar, which is part of a co-located facility, is also have an ability to submit HSL information?
Yeah, so as part of the hybrid policy initiative where the hybrid and co-located resources went live, it was listed as a required point for hybrid renewable components, any co-located resource, and then also any renewable resource wanting to provide ancillary services. So it is a required point for co-located as well. Kind of like what I had mentioned is those co-located resources frequently receive dispatch instructions. So any resource behind those aggregated capability and constraints is being required to follow its dispatch. So that means the telemetry could be impacted by, you know, the market moving that resource around and not just the weather moving those renewable resources around. So that's why we have it as a required point for those co-located resources, so we can continue to get good quality telemetry information during those frequent market dispatches with those ACCs.
Could you shed some light as to why the HSL quality is bad? And I'm sure it's on the asset owner, so I can follow with our team, but is there any information you have that you could share that I can take it back to my team?
We've seen a variety of issues. The ones shown on the slide are probably the 2 or 3 most common ones that we've seen HSL reacting to supplemental dispatch. That's not something we want to see, because then the forecast would also react to supplemental dispatches if we're training off the HSL instead of telemetry issues, because ideally, you know, HSL isn't impacted by those market dispatches. So if it is being impacted, we would assume that even if the follow DOT flag is yes, that the HSL shouldn't be reacting, so that can have a negative impact from that way. Sometimes we do see like spikes and changes in the irradiance, like sharp changes and spikes in the irradiance data can also show up in the HSL as well, which is just kind of inherent in the way it's formed and calculated using the irradiance information for solar resources. So that's another piece that we've seen potentially have some impacts to the forecast as well. And then some of them are also just kind of like the shape of the HSL is a little bit off compared to what the telemetry is. We would expect it to be HSL and telemetry to be a little closer to one another during times when there aren't any market dispatches around. So those are just kind of a few examples, and I'm sure in that the storage design and modeling initiative that I mentioned, where we're going to be kind of introducing potentially some enhancements to how the HSL is calculated, we'll kind of get into all of those details. But we are also working through kind of monitoring resources and reaching out to them when we do see some concerns with HSL quality that could be negatively impacting the forecast. So we've been working on reaching out to resources through the city process to just let them know that we see some concerns and could potentially be impacting their forecast accuracy with some of the HSL quality that we're seeing. So kind of a variety of things.
Yeah, a couple of things. So we have seen significant degradation on some of our co-located facilities. And what we were surprised is, we had multiple solar facilities, but only one or two assets were seeing significant degradation. So this explains the issue. Would CAISO staff be willing to at least engage at specific resource level? Because some of these problems can be really deep and difficult to quantify, and we might benefit from feedback on specific assets. So is the best course of action to submit a ticket for specific assets and months?
Yep. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we definitely are working with individual resources when we see HSL concerns come up, especially when they could be impacting the forecast. So yeah, you can just submit a city ticket. It'll get routed over to us. We can do a deep dive into that resource particularly. And if there are any specific dates or times where you think the forecast looks weird or could be impacted by the HSL, you can reach out to us and let us know that too. That always helps to have specific time and date information. But yeah, we're happy to have conversations at the individual resource level to work on improving the HSL and the forecast.
Two more things. I looked at the paper or the issue paper that's going to be discussed for Monday. There is a link for HSL FAQ, but for some reason that link is broken. So it will be, this is just a flag for Monday. And I also want to chime in or second what Chris Devon from TerraGen said. We would also, when there is a discussion about this need to follow DOT for co-located assets, it will be good to see a little more justification of why that is needed. And maybe if ops could chime in, because in the paper there is a discussion about, following DOT, but really a lack of justification of why that is still needed. So if you can take it back to the team, that would be helpful.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. I'll take that back to the team and we'll check on that HSL FAQ link for you as well and get that fixed. Thank you for letting us know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another hand raised by Kathleen.
Great, thanks. Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Thanks so much, Jessica. I appreciate this. And, I echo Rahul and Chris's ask for more information on that follow dot as well. It seems like it's very related. So as far as education goes, that would help me. I'm just not as sophisticated. We don't have any renewables in our fleet at this time, so I'd really appreciate that education. I had some clarifying questions, if you don't mind. I think I got caught up on the bad telemetry slide. And as I listened to you, and I appreciate the talk and the conversation about the HSL, but even looking at your bad HSL, one question I have for you is, are we certain it's a bad HSL? Or like if I'm looking at this relative delta between the telemetry and the HSL, the red and the pink, right? The question is, do we know the HSL is bad, or is it possible the telemetry is bad? And is that a part of what we're working through with all these resources?
One of the things that we do is compare the HSL to telemetry, and because HSL is more of a calculated point using, inverter information, resource properties, weather, it's a little bit more likely to be an error than the telemetry points could be. But, we do kind of do a comparison of the two of them and look at both of them to make sure that they look reasonable compared to the irradiance values coming in and like the market dispatches that are present, and neither of them are kind of off or wonky before we do any outreach to a resource.
That makes sense. Is it fair that what I'm taking away from your presentation is that you would look at that and identify if you think it's the telemetry that's bad, and then the conversation would, so like this example, it is a bad HSL, but there could be a similar looking chart where you would have said, okay, your telemetry had bad quality.
Yep, yeah, and if there's bad telemetry quality, we also work to reach out to the resources as well. So there are some automatic notifications that go out when the rig goes down, but we are working on notifying the resources when individual points go down as well, because they can't have significant forecast impacts when just like 1 or 2 points go down too. So that's also something that we're doing outreach on.
Oh, that was super helpful, because my second question for you was I wanted to have a better understanding of what you meant by bad quality on the metering side. You said go down. That makes sense. If the rig goes down, for sure. Are there other scenarios that we should be thinking about as possibly being bad, or is that just a rig drop, basically it?
We do receive like a quality flag from the resources that tells us that the telemetry information is in good quality, and that's what we use to determine if the data to feed persistence is in good quality. So it is possible for the data quality to be bad, but that flag to still be good. So that's one of the things we're also working on, is the resources saying it's sending us good quality, but if you look at the values, it actually can be bad. So right now, we do use that quality flag coming from the rig to determine if the telemetry is good or bad quality to automatically switch on and off persistence. But we're also working on developing more tools to catch data quality that might be bad where the rig is not indicating that it could be bad quality data.
Yes, super helpful. And just one last thing, because when you see that flag, I would assume you don't have insight into the drivers behind that bad quality, and that it has to be a case-by-case conversation with the operator. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we just see that the flag is, bad quality, and then it hands over to the EDAS team, and they're the ones who work with the resources to confirm that the data quality is back and check that and validate that it's coming back online and all that stuff.
Okay, this is awesome. Thank you. And sorry. One more is you mentioned that persistence is shut off. I just wanted to confirm. My understanding is we're talking about a resources forecast and not like a collective persistence to shut off for all of the resource forecasts. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, it's at the individual resource level. And so all that I went over is at the individual resource level, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, we do have another question from Alva.
Hi, Alva from PG&E. I just had one concern, and it may have been. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, good. It may have been sort of covered by the previous comments, but it seems that this issue of the HSL not serving the purpose it was originally intended for, and the various issues that are involved with it, might be one that is important enough to make sure that people don't generally consider themselves stakeholders in a storage enhancements initiative, as in the solar resources that happen to find themselves co-located because of constraints, should be aware that this is a very important issue that they might need to be part of the discussion on. I mean, it seems to me like the stakeholders for that part of the discussion might be broader than what has been the stakeholder group for the storage initiative. I just wanted to see if there was any correctness in that, or whether you think you've got that group properly informed that this is going to be a part of that initiative.
Yeah, right now we put it in that initiative because it is required for hybrid and co-located resources, which do have storage resources mostly attached to them. So that's where we thought it would be appropriate right now. But I can talk to the project team and make sure that we are circulating it in the correct circles, so it also gets kind of flagged for like all of the renewable resources that could have interest in following some of the HSL
Anybody that could
as
be
well.
affected by it. Yeah, I think that you've got it in the right place, but the problem is whether there are market participants who might not realize that something that is impactful to them is going to be considered there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I will mention that to them.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. So I think we're good to move forward. I'll hand it off to Becky, and thank you, everyone. I know we're pushing through the lunchtime, but we're going to try and end early and just push through.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Becky Robinson. I'm going to be doing the policy update today. If we go to the next slide. So first, I wanted to talk about assistance energy transfer. So we are bringing that to the for a decision in July. And that proposal, it's a very streamlined proposal. We had a stakeholder meeting a couple months ago where we kind of showed the red line tariff language we're anticipating. It essentially does two things. First, it removes the current sunset provision that would have assistance energy transfer sunset at the end of this year. We shared some analysis that the analysis team has done around that, to get comfortable with how we're seeing the product be used, and got good stakeholder support for continuing the availability of that product. The other change that we're doing is based on, something that we saw happen recently, but where we want to specify that we will remove the assistance energy transfer surcharge where it's directly attributable to actions taken in coordination with the reliability coordinator. So again, if you're in a situation where a BA is, working with the reliability coordinator to, maintain the reliability of the system, we don't want people to have to sort of weigh, well, am I going to see AET surcharges for doing this? So again, we got good stakeholder support with the direction of that. I think we may need to kind of spell out some of that in the BPMs, but we will plan to do so. And I think I see a hand from Kathleen. Kathleen, is your question on AET?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Becky. Kathleen from Vistra. Thanks for this update. Support the direction of keeping the AET, right, this energy transfer. I just have a quick question on an element of the scope. So with removing the sunset, I think a part of that sunset date was like a little bit of comfort that the commitment, when we launched this product, we made CAISO and everyone, it was a compromise was made that it could be compensated out of the market, but broad stakeholder support and agreement that it needed to be priced in the market at some point. I was thinking with this change that what that means is that price formation scarcity track is where that element of this problem should get shifted. I was just hoping if you could consider that and then also provide, does that make sense to you? Is that the right direction? Because that was the ask I was planning to make. So.
That's a great question. I don't know that we've sort of explicitly talked about that, but I see why you raised that question. I definitely see the relevance there. I think we, happy to take that back and consider it. And thanks, Kathleen.
Cool. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I think we can go to the next slide then. Okay, next up, congestion revenue rights enhancements. So we have a working group going on this where, which has discussed so far, how the program is currently structured and functions for stakeholders. We've been through the root cause analysis, again, that the analysis team did on looking at how the market's been performing since the 2018 reforms. They've done some benchmarking to looking at other ISO RTOs and their equivalent of financial transmission rights, how that's working elsewhere. And we've talked about potential goals and problem statements to guide CRR policy changes. But still kind of in that working group stage and working towards, getting into policy development here in the latter part of this year. And then this middle bullet is just really kind of saying, this whole working group is delivering on our commitment that we made as part of the 2018 reforms to look at how those reforms performed in the market and, continue to consider changes if needed. So I'll pause there, and I think we have a hand from Alva.
Hi, Becky. A conceptual question on this one. Do you see the sort of initiative to essentially reform congestion revenue rights as a CAISO instrument as separate, or, and I know you have, maybe it's addressed by that last bullet, but as separate or having to be essentially joined at the hip with the question of how CRRs get implemented for other EDAM entities?
That's a great question, Alva, and we've been trying to sort through, as we've been, working through the congestion revenue allocation initiative that just got approved by the board and governing body last week. We've been trying to, do some critical thinking on what is properly located in that conversation, and we're going to start up those conversations again in Q4 of this year, versus what's properly located or housed in the CRR enhancements initiative. And is there some overlap, right? Are there some things where it's really relevant to both? And we might need to kind of have some jointly hosted meetings, if you will, between two different working groups. I don't have a clear answer to you yet on that, but from that general sort of setup that I was just talking about. But I think to your question of, is the CRR enhancements going to continue to consider CRRs as a question of what do we want for the CAISO BA CRR market as it exists today and any improvements to it? I think that is the role of the CRR enhancements working group and policy development. But okay, I think there might be some areas where we need some close coordination. Yeah, like if we start talking about firm flow entitlements in the congestion revenue allocation initiative, for instance, like I could see that it's really relevant to the loop flow conversations that have been happening in the CRR enhancements.
And I guess there's just a need for an agreement from the EDAM decisional side that I mean, is it? Remind me, I know convergence bids are supposed to be rolled out for all EDAM participants. I don't think that's the case with CRRs, right? It's not an automatic. There's nothing in the way EDAM has been set up that says that at some point all EDAM entities will have CRRs, but unlike convergence bids. Is that correct?
It's right. Whether EDAM entities elect to move to CRRs is it's up to
selective
them.
For the BAs,
yeah.
because they have the right to allocate their congestion revenues as they see fit. Okay, that's good. I appreciate that clarity, and thanks for the additional color on that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Alva. Appreciate that. And your comment, Alva, your question reminds me that I also wanted to highlight as part of this, in case anyone missed it, that we did have a workshop on June 12th, I believe, a couple weeks ago on CRR modeling and settlement for EDAM Day 1. And that was kind of our implementation plan for how we, are thinking about CRR modeling and settlement for EDAM Day 1. And so you can find materials for that on the CRR webpage, the CAISO CRR webpage. And we are taking comments on that workshop. So just wanted to flag that for folks in case anyone missed it. And with that, I think we can go to the next slide. All right, so we've got our demand and distributed energy market integration working group, which is at a high level, exploring developing or enhancing participation models we have and the market rules around DR and DER participation. And the working group has kind of, organized the thoughts into these various topics, various problem statement development topics that you see here, and it's just kind of working through them in turn. I won't list them all out, but suffice it to say, they've got 6 working group sessions left to keep working through this list of topics. And then at the end of the year in Q4, planning to move into that more policy development phase at that time. So appreciate everyone's engagement in discussing these issues. Any questions on demand and distributed energy? Okay, next slide, please. So next up, storage design and modeling. This, again, big initiative with a number of different topics within it. So outage management, which we recently issued an issue paper and straw proposal on those set of topics. Uplift and default energy bids is another key topic area, along with state of charge management. And then the fourth topic area, mixed fuel and distributed level resources. And on that last one, again, we recently released a discussion paper there on that topic. So lots of work going on there and kind of getting into some of the other topics while we, get feedback on those couple papers that we've put out. And then also in the storage space, in case you missed the morning or just as a reminder, outside sort of the policy development space, we did recently update the state of charge formula to ensure the availability of flexible ramp up from storage resources. That went into place on June 3rd, I believe, and I think the analysis team went through what they're seeing so far since that change. And so, again, if you missed that, there's some slides on that early in the MPPF deck from this morning. Any questions on storage?
Not seeing any hands raised and no questions in the chat.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, EDAM congestion revenue allocation. So we touched on this a little bit already, but the final proposal on this was published June 6th, and it was approved by the Board of Governors and governing body just last week. And at bottom, that proposal allocates parallel flow congestion revenues associated with the exercise of OAT transmission rights, certain eligible OAT transmission rights, allocates that congestion revenue to the EDAM balancing area where those revenues accrued, as opposed to the balancing area where the transmission constraint is located. But again, just for those exercised eligible OAT transmission rights. So that's what we're doing there, and that will be filed with FERC either today or possibly tomorrow, but this week, to get that in front of FERC for them to consider the matter. So a lot of focus on that in the last couple months. Appreciate everyone's engagement on that topic. It's a complex issue, and we were on an expedited path there. So appreciate that. Any questions here? Yes, Tanya.
Yeah. Yes, hi, Becky. Thank you for the update. How do you see this introduced into the implementation for EDAM? I know there's no implementation meeting, section today, but do you see that after the filing, then it will be a new initiative for as a part of the EDAM?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I may not be the best person to answer that in terms of how it will roll into implementation. So I may need to follow up in terms of what you should expect to see for next steps on that. I will say, we are. If you've been following the board meetings last week and the Market Surveillance Committee opinions and market expert opinion of the governing body, we committed as part of the back and forth with them and, responding to some of their ideas for what we should consider. We are planning to do some analysis and monitoring of this issue, and we would be reporting out on that, potentially is alongside, for instance, parallel operations and so forth in terms of what we're seeing there. But that's really more to kind of inform what is look like? What do we expect this to look like in EDAM? I hear your question is a little bit different of how does this flow into the implementation activities. So I can take a follow-up on that and get back to you if that works.
Great. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. We can go to the next slide then. Gas resource management. So here we are working on a straw proposal, and we've, I think, shared some of our initial thinking on the straw proposal with stakeholders at the last stakeholder meeting, and we got comments there, and that was very helpful. So we are incorporating that, into our thinking and working on getting that written straw proposal out. Hopefully sometime in we're running out of June, but June or July timeframe. Want to get that in front of stakeholders to get some more feedback on that direction. And just, to kind of hit at a high level, what is that straw proposal going to cover? We've got 3 sub-bullets here. Enhancing that advisory gas burn information in advance of the day-ahead market results. So along the lines of a D+2 kind of market run, where you can see perhaps what to expect in terms of what your day-ahead market results might be. A second sub-bullet there, exploring what does cost recovery look like during exceptional circumstances, or what can we do around exceptional circumstances to recognize that in terms of bidding flexibility and so forth. And then finally, thinking about how does the ISO coordinate with gas pipelines and the broader regional market during potentially restrictive operating conditions. And so we just got a note here to say, some of these are tariff changes, others might just be process enhancements, but really trying to work towards how to make, meaningful progress on building more confidence around gas resource participation in the extended day-ahead market, especially in in the regional market footprint of the West, with the particularities and unique attributes of that space in terms of gas pipelines, gas storage, et cetera. So that's what I have for this, and I think I see we have a question from Alba.
Hi, Becky, I haven't been following this initiative, so since this is the opportunity for people who haven't been involved to learn about some of these things, I just wanted to know on that first bullet about enhancing advisory gas burn information, is that information CAISO will be providing on OASIS? Will it be provided, or is it provided to specific market participants? What's the nature of that advisory gas burn information?
Yeah. I think it is provided specifically to certain market participants. There's some sensitivity around that information, as you might imagine. But it is something that we provide today. Well, there is a version of this that we provide today to entities in the existing day-ahead market in terms of expected gas burn, based on bids that we have from resources.
So that's
I think how it's provided, I do not know.
Okay,
but that's a good guess. But yeah, we've been sort of taking on, day in the life of EDAM, what does that look like for folks, and thinking about some enhancements, maybe some tweaks and changes to how we produce that information to try and get it to be, better information, more actionable information, and thinking about, our new market participants in the extended day-ahead market. But it's a souped-up version, if you will, of something that we provide today, but yes, only to the market participant themselves. So we're not sharing, market-sensitive information publicly.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Seeing no other hands, I think we go to the next slide. Greenhouse gas coordination. So this working group has been recently, in the last several months, really focused on a particular topic of accounting for state policies for carbon reduction, but that do not use a price or a cap and trade for those carbon emissions. So the working group has been focused on designing a reporting, an accounting and reporting approach that would not affect the market dispatch per se, but would be something that takes the market dispatch into account, but would also take into account things like contracts to kind of account for and to ultimately come up with a residual emissions rate in the market, looking at looking at market dispatch, but kind of taking out what's been attributed through our existing sort of GHG, market mechanisms, and potentially taking out what's contracted, right? What energy has been spoken for, what's been attributed to a particular entity, and then what's left in terms of if you're buying from the market, what is the emissions profile of those purchases? So there's been a subgroup that's meeting, I think, weekly or biweekly perhaps now, reporting back up to the working group, but really kind of working on the details of that report format. We put out a straw proposal several weeks ago, I think, and even though this is kind of a reporting thing, it may still need some tariff changes to either outline funding approach or maybe to clarify, the need to get emissions factors from entities in the market associated with their resources so that we can do those kinds of calculations. Any questions here?
No hands raised and no questions in the chat.
All right, next slide then. Price formation enhancements. So we've had a little bit of a break in terms of stakeholder meetings on price formation enhancements. This is one where we had anticipated maybe weekly meetings, and with taking on the congestion revenue allocation topic, kind of said we needed to make some room on the calendar and take a pause on stakeholder meetings here. But the team has continued to work internally and taking into account stakeholder feedback that we had received up to up to that point. And so we are working on a straw proposal, which would be to cover scarcity pricing and market power mitigation, BAA level market power mitigation. We have been targeting Q2. I think this is one where I probably should say June or July as well, again, because we're running out of June. Happy summer, everyone. I hope you all have great vacation plans where you're going to take advantage of the summer rather than let it run away from us all. But I will note that the straw proposal we're working on here will incorporate some suggestions from the recent Market Surveillance Committee meeting, where they had some ideas on market power mitigation and reacting to some analysis that my colleague Guillermo's team had done in terms of what does moving to a grouping of BAs approach look like in terms of how that mitigation is either increasing or lessening. We think of that approach as avoiding unnecessary mitigation. And so taking some good input into account from them, you'll see that in the straw proposal when it hits the street, again, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And I see Alva, you have a question on price formation.
Yes, and thank you, Becky. This area of scarcity pricing, it seems to have crept into this. I was under the impression that market power mitigation was the only live part of this, and George's algorithm for pooling BAAs was really the substance of this. Is scarcity pricing being brought in there as the one way you could bring that in there and not require a lot more work would be to say there's not going to be any scarcity pricing. But if there is, my impression from the discussion was that it was still quite a contentious area. Not as contentious as fast start pricing, but still contentious.
Fair point. And thank you for highlighting that. So, right, initially with price formation enhancements, we had 3 topics, including fast start pricing, as you mentioned, and as a reminder on that for other folks, we did, as part of the roadmap process, we put out a revised roadmap for the rest of this year. We moved Fast Start pricing to the back burner to say, we've got too much on the plate. That's one topic that we can, reflecting stakeholder priorities, move to the back burner for now. And so straw proposal does not include that. I would say, I think we have, even as these are, different big umbrellas of topics with a lot of threads underneath each of them, I think we have tried to package, market power mitigation reforms and scarcity pricing reforms a little bit together as a, perhaps, as a push and pull, right? Wanting to make sure we get prices right, wanting to make sure through market power mitigation that prices are not above what they should be. But also, thinking through scarcity pricing to make sure that prices are not lower than they should be either. I take your point. I think it's a fair point that there's been, we've explored a lot of area on scarcity pricing, a lot of different potential areas of reform, and I think some of those have proven to be, maybe not ripe for action at this time. We are, I think, continuing to think through, I think along the lines you mentioned of, we've gotten some stakeholder feedback on various pieces of that. We're trying to take that into account. And certainly I think there will be time, there will be opportunities to react to the straw proposal and to provide that feedback. And certainly we're not, I don't think the plan is to move forward with everything that's been explored on scarcity pricing. So trying to take that all into account, but to make sure that we are doing, doing the work we need to do to make sure that we don't have vulnerabilities in our pricing and sending high price signals when we need to, right? When the market, when that's reflective of what the market conditions you're seeing.
It seems like a very reasonable goal. I just wasn't clear that you'd arrived at a solution, and in particular, you're saying that what you're going to propose is a solution that can kind of be implemented on in the same time frame as the market power mitigation piece of it. So I'll look forward to seeing the paper, and I appreciate your going through the thinking on that. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Alva. And yeah, I do certainly want to emphasize, especially because we have had some breaks in the stakeholder meetings on this topic. The intent of putting a straw proposal out isn't to say, hey, this is what we're doing, it's a surprise. I think it is meant to be a way of kind of kicking off those conversations, but putting something concrete out there that represents, our best thinking based on what we've explored and heard to date, but to kind of be a little bit more concrete to see, is this a viable path forward? So really look forward to your feedback on that.
Yeah. You'll have a concrete proposal, in other words, is what you're planning to do. Yeah.
Hoping to, yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Alva. All right. Seeing no other hands, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, resource adequacy. So this has been a working group that's put out some papers recently. So on track 1, which is on our capacity modeling or loss of load expectation modeling and default counting rules in our tariff. We have recently put out a straw proposal, I think just a couple weeks ago. And thank you all for, participating there and for the feedback that you've, in reacting to that. And I think comments around that are due, maybe you're already due this week, but I think comments were due this week. So thanks for your input on that. I should note as well that includes a proposal for what to do about ambient D rates and how to make sure we're taking those into account so that we're not expecting or thinking that we're going to get more capacity from resources than they can reasonably be expected to produce, especially in the hot summer months when we see some sizable levels of ambient D rates. On track 2, I think we are continuing to develop a straw proposal on those items on addition substitution, as well as availability and performance incentives. So stay tuned for, to see something written on that in the next couple months. And then track 3, visibility and backstop. Well, on visibility, we put a STAR proposal out probably a month or so ago on, proposal for how to think about information that would be helpful to the ISO to see, so that we have a better sense of what resources are available, aside from resources shown from RA, what's going on with the rest of the fleet that we know exists, but does it have obligations elsewhere that we should be aware of, so that we're, again, not expecting more availability of resources than we should be. So that's what I have on RA. Any questions there?
No, yeah, no questions.
Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this is just to touch on the policy initiatives catalog and roadmap, which we published, again, I mentioned before, we published a revised roadmap for the rest of this year back in May, and that was presented to the governing body and Board of Governors at the May joint meeting. And there, again, just to recap, we were trying to update schedules for existing policy initiatives to make sure that we're not overloading stakeholders. And so for the catalog process, we published that catalog on June 13th. And then the next steps on this matter is to think about that 3-year forward roadmap, and we'll be putting out draft and final roadmaps in Q4 of this year. Any questions here? And
no questions.
Okay. And then I think if we can go to the next slide, these are just our visuals for the year, for where things are, what stage of the process. So we've got this one, and then I think one more on the next slide. Thank you. Right, so here you see continuing that. And then I think, is there one more slide? And this is just showing our process for policy development. And with that, I think that is the end of my update. Any final questions?
Not seeing any hands raised. No questions in the chat.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate the time today. Thanks, Hannah.
Awesome. Thank you. If you can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, one more slide. And one more, sorry. Okay, just some closing remarks here. Next meeting is tentatively scheduled for September 18th, and it will be confirmed via notice. Next slide. Okay, and then here's a look at all of the meetings that have happened this week, and they are also all listed on the ISO calendar, as well as comment submissions deadline. Next slide. The ISO encourages market participants to review the new trainings page on the market participant portal. This is in addition to the Learning Center, and it will be a centralized location for accessing computer-based training videos. And then for market simulations, please refer to our release schedule for the most recent updates of initiatives scheduled for MAP and production and stage market sims. And then you can see here is a list of important publications and announcements. Next slide. And then for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be sure to be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog. The most recent blog was about the important issue of congestion revenue allocations across the EDM footprint, which I know we spoke about during this meeting, so be sure to check that out. And then next slide. And then you can always visit our webpage for more information. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to the ISO stakeholders or myself, hpearson@kaiso.com. And with that, I'd really like to thank you all for joining today's call, and thank you for going through your lunchtime. but we'll be able to get some time back. So thank you all and have a great day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Inteller. You may now disconnect.